The train's brakes screamed against iron rails, metal grinding against metal in a sound that made Evelyn's teeth ache. She stood in the narrow aisle between wooden benches, one gloved hand gripping the seat back as the car lurched and shuddered. Through the dust-streaked window, she could see the platform approaching, rough-cut timber posts holding up a sagging roof that looked like it might collapse in a strong wind. Ashford Station. Population unknown. Hope questionable. She'd been traveling for 6 days. 6 days of stale bread, water that tasted like rust, and the constant rumble of wheels beneath her feet. 6 days of rehearsing what she'd say when she finally met him. Thomas Garrett, the man who'd written her 3 letters over 4 months, each one more certain than the last that she was exactly what he needed. A partnership, he'd called it. A fresh start for both of them. The other women in her car had already gathered their bags. They watched her with that particular mix of pity and curiosity that she'd learned to ignore. Mail-order brides, all of them. Coming west to marry men they'd never met, trading uncertainty in the east for uncertainty in the west. At least here, they told themselves, there was land, space, possibility. Evelyn had told herself the same thing. The train jerked to a final stop. Someone coughed. A baby started crying 3 rows back. Evelyn smoothed her traveling dress, dark blue wool, practical, the nicest thing she owned, and picked up her carpet bag. Everything she had left in the world fit inside it. 3 dresses, 1 pair of good shoes, undergarments, her mother's silver hairbrush, and the packet of letters tied with string. She stepped down onto the platform, and the wind hit her like a fist. It wasn't the cold, though October in the territories carried bite. It was the openness. Back in Philadelphia, buildings pressed close, blocking the sky. Here, there was nothing but space, empty land stretching forever, broken only by scattered buildings that looked temporary, like someone had dropped them and planned to pick them up later. "Miss Harper?" She turned. A man stood 10 feet away, hat in his hands. Mid-30s, thin-faced, wearing a suit that had seen better days. Behind him stood another man, broader, older, with the kind of face that had forgotten how to smile. "I'm Evelyn Harper," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. The thin-faced man glanced at his companion, then back at her. "I'm Thomas Garrett." She'd imagined this moment dozens of times. In her mind, he'd stepped forward, smiled, maybe even offered his hand. In her mind, there'd been warmth, recognition, the beginning of something. Instead, he just stood there, looking at her like she was a package that had arrived damaged. "You're older than your photograph," he said finally. The words landed like stones. Evelyn's hand tightened on her bag. "The photograph was taken 2 years ago." "You said you were 26. "I am 26. "You look older." Behind him, the broader man shifted his weight. Other passengers moved past them, reuniting with people who'd actually wanted them to arrive. Somewhere a horse whinnied. The wind carried the smell of dust and manure. "I've had a long journey," Evelyn said carefully. "Perhaps we could—" "I'm sorry," Thomas interrupted. "This won't work." The platform seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "I'm sorry?" "This arrangement, it won't work." He said it matter-of-factly, like he was declining a business proposition. "I was very clear in my letters about what I needed. Someone young, sturdy, good for bearing children and managing a household. I'm all of those things. You're not what I expected." The broader man touched Thomas's shoulder. "Let's discuss this somewhere private." "There's nothing to discuss, Martin." Thomas turned back to Evelyn, and she saw something almost like guilt flicker across his face. Almost. "I'll arrange for your return ticket. The next eastbound train leaves tomorrow morning. You can stay at the boarding house tonight. I'll cover the cost." "You can't be serious." "I'm very serious, Ms. Harper. This was a mistake. Mine, perhaps, for not being more specific in my letters. But a mistake nonetheless." He put his hat back on. "Martin will see that you're settled for the night. I'm sorry you came all this way for nothing." He walked away. Just like that. Thomas Garrett turned and walked away, his boots echoing on the platform, leaving Evelyn standing alone with her carpet bag and the wreckage of every plan she'd built. The man he'd called Martin cleared his throat. "I can show you to the boarding house." Evelyn didn't move, couldn't move. The shame was a physical thing, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Around her, the platform had emptied. The other women were gone, claimed by their prospective husbands. Even the conductor had disappeared back into the train. She was alone. And everyone who remained, the station master in his little booth, the men loading freight, the woman sweeping the general store steps across the street, they were all looking at her. They'd all watched Thomas Garrett reject her. They'd all heard him say she wasn't good enough. "Miss?" Martin said quietly. "I heard you." Her voice sounded strange, distant. "The boarding house." "This way." She followed him off the platform, her legs moving automatically while her mind spun in circles. This couldn't be happening. She'd given up her job at the textile mill, sold her mother's furniture, spent every cent she had on the train ticket and the trousseau she'd carefully packed. She'd burned every bridge, closed every door, stepped off every cliff because Thomas Garrett's letters had promised solid ground. "I'm a man of principle," he'd written. "When I commit to something, I see it through. You can depend on that." Apparently not. The boarding house was a 2-story structure with peeling paint and windows that needed washing. Martin opened the door for her, and a wave of cooking smells washed out. Onions, grease, something burnt. A woman emerged from a side room, wiping her hands on her apron. She was maybe 50, with gray hair pulled back severe and eyes that had seen everything twice. "Ruth," Martin said, "this is Miss Harper. She needs a room for tonight. Thomas is covering it." Ruth's eyebrows went up. She looked at Evelyn, then at Martin, then back at Evelyn. Understanding dawned across her face, followed quickly by something that might have been sympathy. "I see," she said. "Well, room 3 is available. Up the stairs, second door on the left." "Thank you," Evelyn managed. "Dinner's at 6. You'll hear the bell." Evelyn climbed the stairs. Room 3 was small. A bed, a washstand, a single chair by the window. The walls were thin enough that she could hear someone coughing in the next room. The floorboards creaked under her feet. She set down her carpet bag and sat on the edge of the bed. The shame was still there, solid and heavy, but something else was growing underneath it. Something hot and sharp. Anger. She'd trusted him, believed every word in those careful letters, built a future around promises that turned out to be worth exactly nothing. And now she was stuck in a town she didn't know, with barely enough money for a return ticket, surrounded by people who'd watched her get discarded like spoiled meat. A knock on the door made her jump. "Miss Harper?" Ruth's voice. "I brought you some water. Thought you might want to wash up." Evelyn opened the door. Ruth stood there with a pitcher and basin, her expression carefully neutral. "Thank you." "Listen," Ruth said, setting the basin on the washstand. "Thomas Garrett's an idiot. Always has been. You're better off." "That's kind of you to say." "Not being kind, being honest." Ruth moved toward the door, then paused. "You got people back east? Family?" "No." "Job waiting?" "No." Ruth nodded slowly. "Then you might want to think about staying." Evelyn blinked. "Here? Territory's growing. Women are scarce. You're educated. I can tell by how you talk. Can read and write, I'd wager. That's valuable out here." She shrugged. "Just something to consider. Better than going back to nothing." She left before Evelyn could respond. Evelyn washed her face and hands, then stood at the window watching the street below. The town was small, maybe 24 buildings clustered around a single main road. Beyond that, nothing but open land rolling toward distant mountains. The sun was starting to sink, painting everything gold and orange. She thought about Philadelphia. The narrow boarding house room she'd shared with 2 other mill girls. The endless gray mornings, the machinery that never stopped, the lint in her lungs, and the exhaustion in her bones. She thought about her supervisor, Mr. Hendricks, and the way he'd started looking at her after her mother died. The way he'd found excuses to stand too close, to touch her shoulder, to suggest she might want to be friendlier if she wanted to keep her position. That's why she'd answered Thomas Garrett's advertisement in the first place. Not because she was desperate to get married, because she was desperate to get out. And now she was right back where she started. Except worse. Because at least in Philadelphia, she'd had a job. The dinner bell rang at 6. Evelyn considered staying in her room. The thought of facing strangers, of enduring their pity or their judgment, made her want to crawl under the blankets and disappear. But she was hungry, and pride would only fill your stomach for so long. She went downstairs. The dining room held 3 long tables. Most of the seats were filled, ranch hands by the look of them, along with a few women and a family with small children. Conversation died when Evelyn entered. Every head turned. She lifted her chin and found an empty seat at the end of one table. Ruth appeared with a plate, beef stew, bread, something that might have been carrots. Coffee? Please. The woman sitting across from Evelyn leaned forward. She was younger, maybe 20, with blonde hair and curious eyes. You're the one who came in on the afternoon train. It wasn't a question. Yes, Evelyn said. For Thomas Garrett. Yes. But Sarah, the man beside her said quietly. Leave it alone. I'm just saying, everyone knows what happened, which is why she doesn't need you bringing it up. He nodded at Evelyn. Sorry about that. My wife doesn't always know when to stop talking. I heard that, Sarah said, but she had the grace to look embarrassed. Evelyn ate her stew. It was better than she'd expected. The meat was tough but flavorful, and the bread was fresh. Around her, conversation gradually resumed. She caught fragments of it. Something about cattle prices, a dispute over water rights, someone's barn that needed repairs before winter. She was halfway through her meal when the door opened and 3 men walked in. The room didn't go quiet this time, but something shifted. People sat up straighter, made space. The man in front was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair and the kind of weathered face that came from years outdoors. He wore work clothes, nothing fancy, but he carried himself like someone who didn't need to prove anything. The 2 men behind him were younger, clearly ranch hands. He scanned the room, his gaze moving past Evelyn without pausing, and headed toward an empty table in the corner. That's Caleb Turner, Sarah whispered, apparently unable to help herself. Owns the biggest ranch in the county. 10,000 acres, they say, maybe more. Her husband sighed. Sarah. What? She should know who people are. Evelyn glanced at Turner. He was talking quietly with his men, apparently unaware of or unconcerned by the attention. There was something solid about him, grounded, like he belonged exactly where he was. She looked away and finished her stew. After dinner, she went back to her room. The sun had set, and the temperature was dropping fast. She could hear the wind picking up, rattling the window frame. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. She sat on the bed and counted her money. $37. That's what she had left after the train ticket and her traveling expenses. Enough for a return ticket with maybe $5 to spare. $5 to rebuild her entire life. The anger was back, burning hotter than before. She'd been careful, prudent. She'd saved for months, planned everything down to the last detail. And it had all fallen apart because some man looked at her and decided she wasn't pretty enough. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Miss Harper? Martin's voice. Can I speak with you for a moment? She opened the door. Martin stood there looking uncomfortable, a small envelope in his hand. Thomas asked me to give you this, for your ticket and expenses. Evelyn took the envelope. Inside were 2 $20 bills. He also wanted me to express his regret that things didn't work out. His regret? Yes, ma'am. Tell Thomas Garrett, Evelyn said carefully, that he can take his regret and… She stopped, took a breath. Tell him thank you for the money. Martin nodded and left quickly, probably relieved she hadn't finished that sentence. Evelyn closed the door and leaned against it. $40. Now she had $77 total. Still not enough to start over. Not really. She could go back east, find another mill job, end up right back in the same trap. Or she could… What? Ruth's words echoed in her head. You might want to think about staying. She walked to the window and looked out at the dark street. A few lit windows. The glow from the saloon down the road. Beyond that, just darkness and stars and empty land stretching forever. What did she have to go back to? Nothing. What did she have here? Also nothing. But at least here, the nothing was new. She was still standing at the window when she heard shouting outside. At first she thought it was just drunk cowboys from the saloon, but the voices were sharp, angry. She pressed closer to the glass, trying to see. Men were running. Someone yelled, "Look out!" And then there was a tremendous crash that shook the building. Evelyn grabbed her shawl and hurried downstairs. Other boarders were already in the street, and she pushed through them to see what had happened. A freight wagon had overturned right in front of the general store. The team of horses was tangled in their harness, screaming and kicking. Barrels had rolled everywhere, and one of them, a massive thing that had to weigh 200 pounds, was still rolling, picking up speed as the street sloped downward. straight toward the platform where a woman stood frozen, too scared to move. No, not a woman. A girl, maybe 14, eyes wide, mouth open in a scream that wasn't coming out. Evelyn ran. She didn't think, didn't calculate the distance or the timing or the stupidity of putting herself between a child and a barrel moving fast enough to kill. She just ran, her boots slapping against the packed dirt, her shawl flying behind her. She hit the girl at a full sprint, wrapping both arms around her and diving sideways. They went down hard, Evelyn taking the brunt of it on her shoulder and hip. Pain exploded through her side. The barrel missed them by inches. It slammed into the corner post of the platform overhang with a sound like a cannon shot. Wood exploded. The post cracked and buckled, and the entire roof section came down in a shower of splinters and dust. Right where the girl had been standing. Right where Evelyn would have been standing if she'd been a second slower. Someone was pulling her up. Multiple someones. Hands on her arms, her shoulders. Voices asking if she was hurt, if she could stand. What was she thinking? "I'm fine," she managed. Her hip was screaming, and her shoulder felt like someone had hit it with a hammer, but nothing was broken. The girl... "Sarah's got her. She's fine. You saved her life." Evelyn blinked dust out of her eyes and looked around. Half the town seemed to have materialized. The girl, someone had said her name was Annie, was crying in Sarah's arms. The overturned wagon was surrounded by men trying to calm the horses, and standing about 10 feet away, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, was Caleb Turner. Their eyes met. He didn't say anything, just looked at her with those dark, unreadable eyes for a long moment. Then he turned and walked toward the wagon to help with the horses. "Come on," Ruth said, appearing at Evelyn's elbow. "Let's get you inside and make sure you're not hurt worse than you think." "I'm fine." "You're limping." Evelyn looked down. Ruth was right. Her left leg wasn't bearing weight properly. "It's just bruised. Inside now." Ruth half-dragged her back to the boarding house. Upstairs in her room, she made Evelyn sit while she examined the damage. The hip was already turning purple, and there was a long scrape down her forearm that Evelyn hadn't even noticed. "You're lucky," Ruth said, cleaning the scrape with water that stung like fire. "Could have been killed." The girl, Joshessa, Annie Morton, lives with her aunt, 11 years old and scared of her own shadow. Ruth wrapped a bandage around Evelyn's arm. "You did a brave thing. Stupid, but brave." "I didn't think about it." "I know, that's what made it brave." Ruth stood back, studying her. "You're going to have to stay off that leg for a few days. Can't go traveling tomorrow in that condition." Evelyn hadn't even thought about the train. "I suppose not. Suppose you'll have to stay a bit longer then." Ruth headed for the door, then paused. "Thomas Garrett rejected you because you weren't what he wanted. Know what I think? You're exactly what this town needs, someone with backbone." She left before Evelyn could respond. Evelyn lay back on the bed, wincing as her bruised hip protested. Through the thin walls, she could hear people talking downstairs, reliving the accident, probably talking about the crazy Eastern woman who'd thrown herself at a runaway barrel. She stared at the ceiling and thought about the way Caleb Turner had looked at her. Not with pity, not with judgment, just assessment. Like he was seeing her clearly for the first time and making note of what he saw. It should have made her uncomfortable. Instead, it made her curious. The next 3 days passed in a blur of pain and boredom. Ruth had been right. Evelyn's leg was too bad for traveling. Every time she tried to put weight on it, pain shot from her hip to her knee. So she stayed in her room, watching the street below and slowly going insane from inactivity. People came to visit. Annie's aunt brought flowers and tears and a basket of muffins that were dry but well-intentioned. Sarah stopped by twice to gossip and bring news from town. Even the station master came, hat in hand, to thank her for saving little Annie and offer her free passage on any train she chose. Thomas Garrett did not visit. On the 4th day, Evelyn managed to make it downstairs for breakfast without limping too badly. The dining room was half empty. Most of the ranch hands ate early and were already gone. She took a seat and accepted coffee from Ruth. "Leg better?" Ruth asked. "Good enough?" "Good enough to travel?" Evelyn hesitated. "I don't know." It was the most honest she'd been since arriving, because the truth was she could probably travel. It would hurt, but she could do it. The question was whether she wanted to. She still didn't have an answer. She was finishing her eggs when Caleb Turner walked in. This time, he didn't head to his usual table. He walked straight toward her, his boots loud on the wooden floor, and stopped beside her chair. Miss Harper. Up close, she could see details she'd missed before. Lines around his eyes from squinting into sun, a small scar on his left cheekbone, hands that were calloused and scarred from work. Mr. Turner, heard you saved Annie Morton's life. I happened to be there. You happened to put yourself between a child and 200 pounds of barrel moving at speed. His voice was flat, factual. That's not luck. That's choice. Evelyn didn't know what to say to that. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down without asking permission. Ruth appeared with coffee, which he accepted with a nod. I have a proposition for you, he said. I'm not interested in... Not that kind of proposition. His expression didn't change. I need someone to run my household. Cook, clean, manage supplies. My housekeeper quit 3 weeks ago to get married, and the place has gone to hell. I can pay $20 a month plus room and board. Evelyn stared at him. You're offering me a job. Yes. You don't know anything about me. I know you're educated. I know you have nerve. I know you work with your hands. I saw the calluses when you reached for that girl. He took a sip of coffee. And I know you need money and a place to stay. How do you know that? Small town, people talk. Heat rose in her cheeks. I'm not a charity case, Mr. Turner. Good. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering employment. He set down his cup. I have 15 men working my ranch. They need to be fed properly and have clean clothes. The house needs to be managed. That's work, Miss Harper. Hard work. I'll expect you to earn your pay. And if I refuse, then you refuse. He stood. But before you do, you might want to consider your options. From what I hear, you've got maybe enough money for a train ticket and a week's rent back east. After that, you're looking at factory work, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, for wages that'll barely keep you alive. He pushed in his chair. I'm offering you something better. Question is whether you're smart enough to take it. He started to walk away. Wait, Evelyn said. He turned back. She looked at him, really looked, trying to see past the weathered face and the blunt words to whatever was underneath, trying to decide if this was another trap waiting to snap shut. Why me? She asked. There must be other women who need work. There are. But I watched you run at that barrel without hesitating. I watched you take a hit that could have broken bones just to get a child out of harm's way. That tells me something. He paused. Most people freeze when things go wrong. You didn't. I need someone who doesn't freeze. You're basing a job offer on 30 seconds of panic? I'm basing it on 30 seconds that showed me who you are when everything's on the line. He tilted his head slightly. You want the job or not, Miss Harper? I've got a ranch to run. Evelyn thought about the train, the long ride back to Philadelphia, the mill, Mr. Hendricks and his wandering hands, the tiny room and the gray mornings, and the slow suffocation of a life she'd already tried to escape once. She thought about Thomas Garrett's rejection and the weight of all those watching eyes. She thought about Annie Morton's face in that split second before the barrel would have killed her, and she thought about Ruth's words. Better than going back to nothing. I want the job, she said. Caleb Turner nodded once. Be ready to leave tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock. Bring everything you own. That won't take long. Something that might have been humor flickered across his face. No, I don't suppose it will. He left then, boots echoing on the floor, and Evelyn sat alone with her cold coffee and the realization that she'd just agreed to move to a stranger's ranch in the middle of nowhere. Ruth appeared at her elbow, refilling her cup. Well, she said, that's unexpected. Is it a mistake? Evelyn asked. Ruth considered the question seriously. Caleb Turner's a hard man. Fair, but hard. He'll expect you to work, and he won't make allowances just because you're a woman. She paused. But he's honest. If he says he'll pay you $20 a month, he'll pay you $20 a month. And if he says you'll have room and board, you will. That's more than most people can promise out here. What about... Evelyn hesitated. Is he decent? Will I be safe? As safe as anywhere. Ruth's voice was firm. Caleb's not the type to take advantage. He had a wife once, died in childbirth 5 years back. Since then, he's kept to himself. You'll be working, not fighting off advances. It wasn't exactly reassuring, but it was something. Evelyn spent the rest of the day preparing. She washed and mended her clothes, repacked her carpet bag, and tried not to think too hard about what she was doing. Every time doubt crept in, she reminded herself of the alternative. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in the narrow bed, listening to the wind and the creaking walls, and wondered if she'd lost her mind. Taking a job from a man she'd spoken to twice, moving to a ranch she'd never seen, throwing herself into another unknown future. But what choice did she have? The world didn't offer many options for women like her. Women without family or fortune or exceptional beauty. Women who were just ordinary, trying to survive. At least this way she'd be earning her own money, making her own choices. At least this way she wouldn't owe anyone anything. She finally dozed off sometime after midnight and woke to Ruth's knock at 5:30. "You sure about this?" Ruth asked, helping her carry her bag downstairs. "No," Evelyn admitted, "but I'm doing it anyway." Caleb Turner's wagon was waiting outside, hitched to two sturdy horses. He was already in the driver's seat, reins in hand. He nodded when he saw her. "Morning, Miss Harper." "Mr. Turner?" He climbed down and took her bag, securing it in the wagon bed with practiced efficiency. Then he offered his hand to help her up to the seat. Evelyn hesitated only a second before taking it. His hand was rough, calloused, warm against her palm. He didn't hold on longer than necessary, just helped her up and then climbed up himself. "Ready?" he asked. "No," she thought. "Yes," she said. He snapped the reins and the wagon rolled forward. Evelyn looked back once. Ruth stood in the doorway of the boarding house, one hand raised in farewell. Sarah was visible in the window of the general store, watching with unabashed curiosity. The station stood empty, its damaged overhang a reminder of barrels and choices and moments that changed everything. Then Caleb turned the wagon onto the main road leading out of town, and Ashford disappeared behind them. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The land stretched out in every direction, rolling hills covered in brown grass, scattered trees, distant mountains sharp against the horizon. The air was cold and clean, carrying the smell of sage and earth. They rode in silence for the first hour. Evelyn found herself studying the landscape, trying to understand what she'd gotten herself into. This wasn't Philadelphia. There were no buildings here, no streets, no crowds, just space. More space than she'd ever seen in her life. It should have felt empty. Instead, it felt open. "The ranch is 2 hours out," Caleb said finally, breaking the silence. "We run cattle mostly, some horses. Got 15 men on payroll plus seasonal workers during roundup and branding." 15 men, Evelyn repeated. "That's a lot of cooking." "You'll have help. 2 of the younger hands rotate kitchen duty. They're terrible at it, but they can follow instructions." He glanced at her. "Can you cook?" "Yes." "What kind of cooking?" "Plain cooking. Stews, roasts, bread. Nothing fancy." "Fancy's not what we need. We need filling." He turned his attention back to the horses. "You ever worked in service before?" "No, I worked in a textile mill." That got his attention. He looked at her again, more carefully this time. "Mill work. That's hard." "Yes." "Why'd you leave?" "Because my mother died and I couldn't afford rent on my own. Because my supervisor was a predator. Because I was desperate and Thomas Garrett's letters promised escape." "I wanted something different," she said instead. Caleb made a sound that might have been understanding. "Fair enough." They rode in silence again. Evelyn watched the landscape change gradually, the hills growing steeper, more trees appearing, a creek running parallel to the road. Once she saw a group of antelope in the distance, their white rumps flashing as they ran. "Rules," Caleb said eventually. "The men are to treat you with respect. If any of them don't, you tell me. I'll handle it." "All right. You'll have your own room in the main house. Door locks from the inside. You're not to be disturbed after 8 unless there's an emergency." "Understood." "Payday is the 1st of every month. $20, like I said. You want to save it? I can hold it for you. You want to spend it? That's your business." "I'll save most of it." He nodded, seeming to approve. "Smart." "Mr. Turner," Evelyn said carefully, "can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why did you offer me this job? Really?" He was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. I told you already. I saw something in you that I needed. Bravery? Decisiveness. He adjusted the reins. Worlds full of people who hesitate, who think too long about what they should do and end up doing nothing. You didn't hesitate. That barrel was coming, that girl was going to die, and you made a choice in a split second. Right or wrong didn't matter. You acted. He glanced at her. That's rare, especially out here, where hesitation gets people killed. Evelyn didn't know what to say to that. Also, he continued, you're desperate. I know what that looks like. Desperate people work harder. That's mercenary. It's honest. He slowed the wagon as they approached a rougher section of road. I'm not a good man, Miss Harper. I'm not cruel, and I don't cheat people, but I'm not good. I do what needs doing, and I expect the same from people who work for me. If that bothers you, speak up now. Evelyn considered that. It doesn't bother me. Then we'll get along fine. The wagon climbed a long rise, and when they crested the top, Evelyn saw the ranch spread out below. It was bigger than she'd expected. The main house was 2 stories, built from logs and stone, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Behind it sat a barn, stables, several smaller outbuildings, and a long, low structure that had to be the bunkhouse. Corrals held dozens of horses. In the distance, she could see cattle scattered across hillsides. 10,000 acres, Caleb said, following her gaze. Give or take. Been in my family since the territory opened. It's... Evelyn searched for words. Impressive. It's a lot of work. He snapped the reins, and they started down the slope. Come on, let's get you settled. As they approached, men appeared from various buildings. They stopped what they were doing to watch the wagon roll in, their faces curious. Caleb pulled up in front of the main house and set the brake. Before he could climb down, a younger man, maybe 25, with red hair and freckles, jogged over. Boss, you actually found someone? I did. Miss Harper, this is Danny Fletcher. He's my foreman. Danny pulled off his hat. Ma'am, welcome to Turner Ranch. Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Just Danny, ma'am. He grinned. Mr. Fletcher was my father, and he's dead, so it feels strange. Danny, Caleb said flatly, help Miss Harper with her bag. Yes, sir. Caleb led the way inside while Danny grabbed Evelyn's carpet bag. The front door opened into a large main room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn furniture, and windows that let in streams of morning light. To the left was a kitchen, bigger than any Evelyn had worked in before, with a massive iron stove and a table that could seat 20. It was also a disaster. Dishes were piled in the basin, the floor needed sweeping, something sticky had been spilled on the counter and left to harden. The whole place had the neglected feel of men who cooked only when forced and cleaned even less frequently. Caleb saw her expression. I told you it had gone to hell. You weren't exaggerating. Your room's upstairs. Danny'll show you. He pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. Take this morning to get settled. This afternoon, I'll introduce you to the rest of the men, and you can start figuring out what you'll need. Evelyn nodded. Danny led her upstairs. The second floor had 4 doors. He opened the second one on the right. This was... He stopped, started over. This is your room. It was simple. A bed with an iron frame, a dresser, a washstand, a small table with a chair. The window looked out over the front yard and the mountains beyond. The walls were bare, but the space was clean. Thank you, Evelyn said. Danny set down her bag. Look, Miss Harper, I know this is probably strange, coming out here to work for a bunch of rough men you don't know. But the boss is fair, and the boys are decent. You'll be safe here. I appreciate that, Danny. He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. And if anyone gives you trouble, you come to me or the boss. Don't try to handle it yourself. I'll keep that in mind. After he left, Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed and looked around her new room. This was it. This was her fresh start. A room in a ranch house, a job cooking for 15 men, $20 a month, and the chance to figure out what came next. It wasn't what she'd planned. It wasn't what she'd dreamed about on that long train ride west. But it was hers, and maybe that was enough. She stood, rolled up her sleeves, and went downstairs to start cleaning the kitchen. Because if there was one thing Evelyn Harper knew how to do, it was work. The kitchen took 3 hours to clean, Evelyn started with the dishes, scrubbing crusted food off plates that looked like they hadn't been properly washed in weeks. The water in the basin turned gray, then brown, then black. She dumped it twice and started fresh each time. Her hands were raw by the time she finished, but every dish was clean and stacked neatly on the shelves. Then came the floor. She swept first, filling half a bucket with dirt and debris. Then she scrubbed on her hands and knees, working the bristles into corners where grease had accumulated. The water turned filthy almost immediately. Her hip still ached from the barrel incident, and kneeling made it worse. But she kept going. The counter was next. Whatever had been spilled there had hardened into something that required a knife to scrape off. Once she got underneath it, the rest came away with hot water and soap. She wiped down every surface twice, then checked the stove. The firebox was choked with ash. The cooking surface was covered in burned-on residue. The oven door hung crooked on its hinges. She was trying to figure out how to fix the door when footsteps sounded behind her. "You don't have to do all that today," Caleb said. Evelyn looked up from where she knelt in front of the stove. "The door's broken. I can't cook with it like this." "I'll have one of the men fix it." "When?" He paused. "When they have time." "Which will be when?" "Probably next week. I need to start cooking tomorrow, unless you want your men eating more of whatever they've been eating for the past 3 weeks. She turned back to the door, examining the hinge. "Do you have tools?" "In the barn." "I'll need a screwdriver and a wrench. Also, do you have any oil?" Caleb stared at her for a moment. Then he disappeared and returned 5 minutes later with a toolbox. He set it down beside her without comment and left again. Evelyn worked on the hinge for 20 minutes before she figured out the problem. Someone had over-tightened the bottom screw, warping the metal. She loosened it, bent the plate back into shape as best she could, then tightened everything evenly. The door still didn't hang perfectly, but it closed properly now. Good enough. She oiled the hinges, cleaned out the firebox, and scrubbed the cooking surface until her arms burned. By the time she finished, the sun was past its peak, and her stomach was reminding her she hadn't eaten since breakfast. She found bread in the larder, stale but edible, and some cheese that was only slightly moldy. She cut away the bad parts, made herself a rough sandwich, and ate standing at the counter while surveying her work. The kitchen looked better. Not perfect. The floor was still scarred. The walls needed paint. The shelves were rough, but functional, clean, ready to be used. It was a start. She was washing her plate when boots sounded on the porch. Multiple sets. The door opened and men filed in, pulling off hats and gloves. They stopped when they saw her, a collective hesitation that filled the room with awkward silence. Caleb entered last. "Miss Harper, these are the men. Men, this is Miss Harper. She'll be running the household from now on." Evelyn set down her dish towel and faced them. There were 8 of them. Apparently the rest were out with the cattle. They ranged in age from maybe 19 to past 50, dressed in work clothes that had seen hard use, weathered faces, scarred hands, eyes that had seen winter and drought, and whatever else this land threw at people. Danny stepped forward first. "You've met me already. This here's Marcus." He gestured to a broad-shouldered black man with gray threading his hair. "Best hand with horses you'll ever meet." Marcus nodded. "Ma'am." Jack and Jimmy Sullivan, 2 younger men, clearly brothers, with matching dark hair and crooked grins. "Don't leave anything valuable around them. They'll gamble it away." "Only if we lose," one of them said. "That's why I said don't leave anything valuable around them." Danny continued down the line. "Pete Garrison handles most of the repairs. Old Tom, we call him that because we've got young Tom, who's out riding fence right now. Chen Wei, best cook we had before the boss hired you, which ain't saying much. And Frank Morrison, who doesn't talk much but works harder than any 3 men combined." Each one nodded or touched his hat as his name was called. Evelyn tried to memorize faces, knowing it would take days before she got everyone straight. "There's 7 more you haven't met," Caleb said. "They'll be back before supper. Speaking of which," he looked at Evelyn, "can you feed 17 men tonight, or should we make do with what we have?" Evelyn looked at the men. They looked back, clearly expecting her to say it was impossible. "I can feed them," she said. "What do you have for supplies?" "Larder's stocked. Smokehouse out back has beef and pork. Root cellar's got potatoes, carrots, onions. I'll need someone to bring me meat from the smokehouse and vegetables from the cellar. Also, I'll need fire started in the stove in about an hour." Danny grinned. You heard the lady. Jack, Jimmy, smokehouse. Pete, root cellar. Marcus, you're on firewood duty. The men dispersed, moving with the efficiency of people used to following orders. Within minutes, slabs of beef appeared on her counter, along with 2 buckets of vegetables. Marcus built up the fire, checking with her twice to make sure the heat was right. Evelyn set to work. She browned the beef in the largest pot she could find, then added onions, water, and every herb she could identify in the larder. While that simmered, she peeled potatoes and carrots, moving fast but careful. Her hands remembered the rhythm from years of cooking in cramped boarding house kitchens. Slice, dice, drop in the pot. Don't waste anything. Make it stretch. The bread was beyond saving, so she mixed up biscuit dough. No time for them to rise properly, but they'd be edible. She rolled out the dough and cut rounds with the rim of a glass, working quickly while the stew bubbled and the room filled with the smell of cooking meat. Someone had brought in a long table and benches. She hadn't even noticed them doing it. Chen appeared with plates and utensils, setting places without being asked. You need help? He asked quietly. Can you make coffee? Yes, ma'am. Strong. These men look like they drink it strong. He almost smiled. Yes, ma'am. The biscuits went into the oven just as the first group of men came back from whatever they'd been doing outside. Young Tom turned out to be about 17, all knees and elbows and nervous energy. The others were older, harder, with the same weathered look as the rest. Caleb made introductions again. Evelyn nodded to each name, knowing she'd forget half of them by morning. By 6 o'clock, the stew was ready. It wasn't fancy, just beef and vegetables and broth, seasoned with what she'd found. But it was hot, and it smelled good, and when she started ladling it into bowls, the men lined up without being told. They ate in silence at first. Then Jack Sullivan, or maybe it was Jimmy, she still couldn't tell them apart, said, "This is actually good." "You sound surprised," Evelyn said. "We've been eating burned beans and jerky for 3 weeks. This is like Christmas." Several men grunted agreement through mouthfuls of stew. Caleb sat at the head of the table, eating steadily, his expression unchanged. But she noticed he took a second helping, then a third biscuit. After dinner, the men cleared their own plates without being asked and filed out, calling thanks over their shoulders. Chen stayed to help wash up, working beside her in comfortable silence until everything was clean and put away. "That was good cooking," he said finally. "It was simple cooking. Simple done right is better than fancy done wrong." He hung up the dish towel. The boss made a good choice. After he left, Evelyn stood alone in the quiet kitchen. Her feet ached, her hands were raw, her hip throbbed. But for the first time since stepping off that train, she felt something other than anger or shame. She felt useful. The next week fell into a rhythm that was both exhausting and strangely satisfying. Evelyn woke before dawn, started the fire, and had coffee ready by the time the men came in for breakfast. Eggs, bacon, porridge, nothing complicated but filling. They ate fast and disappeared to their work, leaving her alone with the cleanup. Then came the real work. The main house had been neglected for months. Dust covered everything. Windows were clouded with grime. The floors were scarred and stained. Evelyn tackled one room at a time, scrubbing and sweeping and washing until her back screamed and her knees went numb. She found evidence of Caleb's late wife in unexpected places. A woman's shawl in the back of a closet, curtains with delicate embroidery, a rocking chair by the fireplace that had clearly been chosen for comfort, not durability. Evelyn left these things where she found them, feeling like an intruder in someone else's grief. Lunch was simpler than dinner: bread, cheese, leftover stew. The men came in shifts, eating quickly before heading back out. Afternoons she spent on mending and laundry. The men's work clothes took a beating, and most of them had been making do with torn shirts and pants held together with hope. She set up a mending station at the kitchen table and worked through the pile garment by garment. Some things just needed buttons. Others required patches. A few were beyond saving and got cut up for rags. Dinner was the main event. She learned quickly what the men liked: thick stews, roasted meat, potatoes prepared any way at all. She learned their quirks, too. Old Tom wouldn't eat anything with onions. The Sullivan brothers would eat anything as long as there was enough of it. Marcus preferred his coffee with 3 sugars. Frank never took seconds of anything, but he always cleaned his plate. And Caleb ate whatever she put in front of him without comment or complaint. By the end of the first week, her hands had developed new calluses on top of the old ones. Her hip had mostly healed, though it still ached when rain was coming. She'd learned everyone's names and started to understand the hierarchy of the ranch. Danny was second in command, the one the men went to when Caleb was unavailable. Marcus ran the horses and had a gift for knowing when an animal was off, even before it showed symptoms. Pete kept everything from falling apart. If something broke, he fixed it. Chen handled most of the supply runs into town and had a head for numbers that made him invaluable during accounting. The others were good workers, reliable and steady. But those four were the core, and Caleb was the center around which everything else orbited. She noticed things about him, the way he never asked his men to do anything he wouldn't do himself. How he remembered details, who had family visiting, who needed new boots, who was saving money to buy his own place someday. He was quiet, but not cold. Fair, but not soft. She also noticed he worked too hard. He was up before everyone else and went to bed after everyone was asleep. He skipped meals when things got busy. She'd seen him mending fence in pouring rain, doctoring sick cattle in the middle of the night, breaking difficult horses that anyone else would have given up on. "He's going to work himself to death," she said to Danny one afternoon while mending a shirt with a torn sleeve. Danny looked up from the bridle he was repairing. "Probably, but good luck telling him that. Has he always been this way?" "Worse since Sarah died. His wife," Danny added when Evelyn looked confused, "she used to make him stop, take breaks, rest on Sundays." He went back to his work. "Without her, he just doesn't." Evelyn filed that information away and said nothing more. On the 8th day, she went to inventory the smokehouse and found they were running low on everything. She mentioned it to Caleb that evening after dinner. "We'll need a supply run soon," she said. "Meat's fine for another week, but flour, sugar, coffee, we're down to the last of it. I'll send Chen to town next week. I should go with him. I need to see what's available, what the prices are like. Get a sense of what we can stretch and what we can't." Caleb paused with his coffee halfway to his mouth. "You want to go to town. I want to do my job properly. That means understanding our supplies." He studied her for a moment. "You know people there will talk. You working out here, living under my roof?" "People already talked when Thomas Garrett left me standing on that platform. I survived it." Something flickered in his expression. Approval, maybe, or respect. "All right, you'll go with Chen on Tuesday." Tuesday came cold and gray with clouds promising rain. Chen brought the supply wagon around at dawn, and Evelyn climbed up beside him, grateful she'd worn her warmest dress. The ride to town took 2 hours. Chen was even quieter than usual, which left Evelyn alone with her thoughts. She'd been so busy the past week that she hadn't had time to think about anything beyond the next meal, the next chore. Now, heading back to Ashford, the memories rushed in. Thomas Garrett's face as he rejected her, the weight of all those stares, the humiliation that had burned through her chest. She straightened her shoulders. That was then. This was now. The town looked the same. Same dusty street, same scattered buildings, same general store with its sagging porch. But when Chen pulled up and helped her down, Evelyn felt different. She wasn't the rejected mail-order bride anymore. She was the housekeeper from Turner Ranch, here on business. Small distinction, maybe. But it mattered. Sarah spotted her first. She came rushing out of the general store, eyes wide. "Evelyn, I heard you were working for Caleb Turner, but I didn't believe it. How are you? Is he treating you well? Are the men respectful?" "I'm fine, Sarah. Yes, he's fair. Yes, they're respectful. But living out there with all those men, isn't it strange? It's work, same as any other work." Sarah looked like she wanted to press further, but her husband appeared in the doorway and cleared his throat meaningfully. She subsided, though her eyes stayed curious. Evelyn spent the next hour going through the general store's inventory with Chen, making lists, comparing prices, calculating what they could afford and what they needed most. The store owner, a thin man named Horace, watched her with thinly veiled surprise. "You sure know your way around a supply list," he said. "I ran a boarding house kitchen in Philadelphia for 2 years. You learn fast when you're feeding 20 people on a budget." His respect visibly increased. "Well, you let me know what you need. I'll make sure Chen gets fair prices." They loaded the wagon with flour, sugar, coffee, beans, rice, and a dozen other staples. Evelyn also bought fabric, rough cotton, that would work for dish towels and aprons. The men's work shirts were taking a beating, and she'd need material for patches. She was examining a bolt of sturdy denim when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Miss Harper." She turned. Thomas Garrett stood 3 feet away, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable. Mr. Garrett, I heard you were working at Turner Ranch. You heard correctly. He shifted his weight. I wanted to say, that is, I hope there's no hard feelings about what happened. Evelyn set down the fabric. Hard feelings. It wasn't personal. You understand that, don't you? Just a matter of expectations not aligning. She looked at him, really looked. Saw the weak chin, the soft hands, the eyes that couldn't quite meet hers. And she felt nothing. No anger, no hurt, just a vague amazement that she'd ever pinned her hopes on someone so thoroughly ordinary. Mr. Garrett, she said quietly, you did me a favor. I did? You showed me exactly who you are before I made the mistake of tying my future to yours. I'm grateful for that. His face went red. Now, see here. Excuse me, I have work to do. She turned back to the fabric, dismissing him as completely as he'd dismissed her. After a moment, she heard his boots retreat. Sarah, who'd been watching from behind a display of canned goods, caught her eye and grinned. The ride back to the ranch was quieter than the ride in. Chen seemed to sense she didn't want conversation, so they traveled in companionable silence while dark clouds gathered overhead. They were an hour from the ranch when the rain started. It came all at once, no warning drizzle, just a wall of water that turned the road to mud within minutes. Chen cursed and snapped the reins, trying to get the horses moving faster, but the wagon wheels bogged down. We need to find shelter, he shouted over the downpour. How far to the ranch? Too far. There's a line shack about a mile north. We can wait it out there. He turned the wagon off the main road, following a track that was barely visible through the rain. Evelyn held on as they bounced over ruts and rocks, water pouring off her hat brim, her dress soaked through within minutes. The line shack appeared through the rain, a small cabin, barely more than 4 walls and a roof. Chen pulled up beside it, and they both jumped down, running for the door. Inside was dark and musty, but dry. A single room with a potbelly stove, a rough table, 2 chairs, and a bed frame with no mattress. Chen immediately started building a fire, while Evelyn wrung water from her skirts. This is bad, Chen said, feeding kindling into the stove. Rain like this, road's going to be impassable for hours. Will the supplies be all right? Covered with canvas, should be fine. He got the fire going and stepped back. But we might be here a while. Evelyn moved closer to the stove, trying to get warm. Her teeth were chattering. At least we have shelter. At least. They waited. The rain pounded the roof, coming down so hard it sounded like gravel being thrown. Thunder rolled in the distance. Through the single grimy window, Evelyn could see nothing but gray. Can I ask you something? Chen said after a while. Of course. Why'd you take this job? You're educated. Could probably find something easier. Evelyn considered the question. Because it was offered. Because I needed it. Because... She paused. Because going back east meant admitting defeat, and I wasn't ready to do that. That's honest. Is that why you're here, at the ranch? Chen smiled slightly. Similar reasons. Came west because there was nothing for me in California. Caleb gave me a chance when most folks wouldn't. Been here 5 years now. He seems to do that, give chances. He does, but he expects you to make good on them. You fail, you're done. You succeed, he'll back you up against anything. Chen added wood to the fire. You're doing good work, by the way. Men are happier, healthier. The house feels lived in again. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just keep doing it. The rain continued for 2 more hours. By the time it finally slowed enough for them to risk the road, the afternoon was nearly gone. They climbed back onto the wagon, both of them stiff and cold, and started the slow journey back. The ranch came into view just as the sun was setting. Evelyn had never been so happy to see a place in her life. Caleb was waiting on the porch. He came down the steps as they pulled up, his face tense. You all right? We're fine, Chen said. Had to wait out the storm at the North Line shack. Caleb's eyes moved to Evelyn. You're soaked through. I'll dry. Get inside. Change. I'll have someone bring you hot coffee. It was an order, not a suggestion. Evelyn climbed down from the wagon, her legs shaky, and headed for the house. By the time she'd changed into dry clothes, someone had left a pot of coffee and a bowl of stew outside her door. She ate in her room, too tired to go back downstairs. Outside, she could hear the men moving around, taking care of the horses, unloading the wagon. Normal evening sounds. She finished the stew and lay back on her bed, fully intending to rest for just a moment before going down to help with dinner. She woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the smell of something burning. Evelyn shot out of bed and rushed downstairs. The kitchen was full of smoke. Chen stood at the stove, frantically waving a towel at a pan that was producing alarming amounts of black smoke. "What happened?" "Tried to make breakfast," Chen said miserably. "Fell asleep at the table. Woke up to this." Evelyn grabbed the pan and moved it off the heat. The eggs inside were charcoal. "Where are the men?" "Already ate. Well, tried to eat. Jimmy made porridge. It was edible, mostly." She opened windows to let out the smoke, then surveyed the damage. Not terrible, just one ruined pan and some very burned eggs. "Why didn't someone wake me?" "Boss said to let you sleep, said you'd earned it after yesterday." Evelyn didn't know what to make of that, so she just started cleaning up the mess. By the time Caleb came in for his second cup of coffee, the kitchen was back in order. "Morning," he said. "Morning. I'm sorry I overslept." "You didn't oversleep. You slept as long as you needed." He poured coffee, added nothing to it, drank it black. "Storm did some damage, took out part of the fence on the east pasture. We'll be working on repairs all day. I'll have lunch ready by noon." He nodded and left. Evelyn stood in the quiet kitchen, coffee in hand, and realized something. This felt normal. Waking up in this house, cooking for these men, managing this endless list of chores, it had started to feel like her life. Not a temporary stop. Not a job she was enduring until something better came along. Just her life. The thought should have scared her. Instead, it settled over her like a warm blanket. 3 weeks after she'd arrived, one of the men got hurt. It was young Tom. He'd been helping repair the barn roof when a board gave way beneath him. The fall wasn't far, maybe 10 feet, but he landed wrong. Evelyn heard the commotion from the kitchen and ran outside to find Tom on the ground, his face white, his left arm bent at an angle that made her stomach turn. The men stood around him, uncertain. "Someone ride for the doctor," Danny said. "Doctor's in Ashford," Marcus pointed out. 3 hours there, 3 hours back. Kid could be in shock by then. "We can't just—" "Move," Evelyn said. They turned to stare at her. "Move," she repeated, pushing through to kneel beside Tom. His eyes were wide with pain and fear. "Tom, look at me. Look at my eyes, not your arm." "It's broken," he gasped. "Oh, hell, it's broken." "Yes, it is. But you're going to be fine." She looked up at the circle of men. "I need 2 straight pieces of wood, each about a foot long. I need clean cloth for binding. I need someone to boil water. And I need whiskey." Nobody moved. "Now," she snapped. That broke the paralysis. Pete ran for wood. Chen headed to the house. Marcus produced a flask from his pocket. Evelyn turned back to Tom. "This is going to hurt. I won't lie to you. But if we don't set it now before the swelling gets worse, it'll hurt a lot more later." "You know how to do this?" "My father was a doctor. I watched him set broken bones dozens of times." That was partially true. She'd watched him once, maybe twice, but her voice was steady and confident, and that's what mattered. Pete came back with the wood. Chen appeared with hot water and clean rags. Evelyn washed Tom's arm carefully, examining the break. It was clean, thank God. Just above the wrist. Painful, but not complicated. "Marcus, I need you to hold his shoulders. Pete, hold his legs. Don't let him move." She looked at Tom. "Drink this." She handed him the whiskey. He took 3 long pulls, coughing. "Ready?" "No." "Good answer." She grasped his arm above and below the break. "On 3. 1." She pulled on 2. Tom screamed. The bone shifted beneath her hands with a sensation that made her want to vomit. But she kept her grip steady, pulling until she felt the ends align. Then she held it there while Pete quickly splinted it with the wood and Chen wrapped it tight. Tom had passed out. "Is he—" Danny started. "He's fine," fainted from the pain. Evelyn checked the splint, making sure it was secure but not too tight. "Someone needs to watch him tonight, make sure the swelling doesn't cut off circulation. If his fingers turn blue or go numb, come get me immediately." "I'll watch him," Marcus said quietly. Evelyn stood, her hands shaking now that the crisis was over. Get him inside. Put him in one of the spare bunks. Keep him warm. The men moved to obey, lifting Tom carefully. Danny hung back, looking at Evelyn with something like awe. Where did you learn to do that? I told you, your father let you watch. That's different from doing it yourself. He shook his head. You probably just saved that kid's arm. Maybe his life, if infection had set in before the doc could get here. Evelyn looked down at her hands. They were covered in Tom's blood. I need to wash up. She walked back to the kitchen on legs that felt like water. Inside, alone, she braced herself against the counter and took several deep breaths. Her hands were still shaking. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her hollow and slightly sick. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. Set a broken bone, probably saved the kid from a badly healed arm, or worse. The door opened behind her. She didn't turn around. You did good, Caleb said. I did what needed doing. Same thing. He moved closer. She could feel him behind her, a solid presence. Danny's right. You might have saved his life. I might have crippled him if I'd done it wrong. But you didn't. Evelyn finally turned to face him. He was watching her with that same assessing look he'd had the day they met. Like he was seeing her clearly and making note of what he saw. Why do you look at me like that? She asked. Like what? Like you're measuring me for something. He was quiet for a moment. Because I am. For what? To see if you'll run when things get hard. To see if you'll break when the pressure's on. He paused. You haven't yet. The winter's just starting. True enough. He turned to leave, then stopped. We eat late tonight. Men are shaken up. They'll need time. I'll have food ready whenever they're ready to eat. He nodded and left. Evelyn washed her hands thoroughly, scrubbing away the blood. Then she started on dinner, cutting vegetables with steady hands while her mind replayed the sensation of bone shifting beneath her fingers. She'd done something today. Something that mattered. And tomorrow she'd wake up and do it all again. Because that's what this life required. Not perfection, not fearlessness, just the willingness to act when action was needed. And maybe, just maybe, that was something she could do. Tom's arm healed crooked anyway. Not badly. He could still use it, still work. But there was a bend in it that hadn't been there before. He never complained, never blamed her. In fact, he thanked her every chance he got, which somehow made it worse. Evelyn tried not to think about it. Tried to focus on the fact that he still had full function, that infection hadn't set in, that he was alive and working. But late at night, alone in her room, she'd stare at the ceiling and wonder if she'd pulled too hard or not hard enough or at the wrong angle. Stop it, Caleb said one evening. They were in the kitchen. The men had finished dinner and scattered to their evening routines. Evelyn was scrubbing a pot that didn't really need scrubbing, her mind elsewhere. Stop what? Beating yourself up over Tom's arm. He's fine. He's grateful. Let it go. Easy for you to say. No, it's not. He set down his coffee cup. You think I don't replay every decision I make? Every time one of my men gets hurt or sick or dies because I sent them to do something dangerous. I could drive myself crazy with it. Sometimes I do. Evelyn looked at him, really looked, saw the tension in his shoulders, the lines around his eyes that came from more than just squinting into sun. How do you handle it? She asked. I don't. I just keep moving forward because stopping doesn't help anyone. He left her with that thought. November arrived with the first real cold. Frost covered everything in the mornings, turning the world silver and brittle. The men wore heavier coats and worked faster to stay warm. Evelyn started keeping a pot of coffee on the stove all day, and it was always empty by evening. One afternoon, Danny came in from checking the fence line with news. Wheeler's men were on our property again. Caleb looked up from the ledger he'd been reviewing. Where? North pasture, same spot as last month. Left marks on the trees, some kind of surveying. They say anything? Rode off when they saw me, but they're getting bolder, boss. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. Evelyn, who'd been rolling out pie dough, paused. Who's Wheeler? Martin Wheeler, Caleb said, his voice flat. Owns the property west of here. Thinks he owns everything west of here, actually. Been trying to buy me out for 2 years. Why don't you sell? Because it's my land. My father's land before that. And because the minute I sell, he'll double his offer to the next rancher, then the next. until he controls the whole valley. Caleb closed the ledger harder than necessary. Some men don't know when to stop taking. Danny shifted his weight. What do you want me to do? Double the patrols on the north boundary. If you see his men again, tell them they're trespassing and they need to leave. Don't start a fight, but don't back down either. And if they don't leave, then we'll deal with it. After Danny left, Evelyn went back to her pie dough, but she could feel the tension rolling off Caleb in waves. Is he dangerous? She asked. Wheeler? He's rich, and he's used to getting what he wants. That makes him dangerous enough. Has he tried anything before, beyond trespassing? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. 2 years ago, someone poisoned my water source. Killed 30 head of cattle before we figured it out. Couldn't prove it was him, but I know it was. Evelyn's hand stilled on the rolling pin. That's, criminal. Yes, but without proof the law won't touch him. He stood, picking up his hat. Don't worry about it. Wheeler's careful. He won't do anything that can be traced back to him directly. But his face said he was worried, even if his words didn't. The next week brought the first snow. Not much, just a dusting that melted by noon, but enough to remind everyone that winter was coming in earnest. Evelyn had never experienced a real winter. Philadelphia got cold, sure, but nothing like what the men described. Stories of snowdrifts tall as a man, temperatures that could kill you in minutes if you weren't prepared, storms that lasted days. She started preparing, checking the larder, making lists, calculating how much they'd need to get through until spring. The men could hunt for fresh meat, but everything else had to be stored now. She was in the root cellar, taking inventory, when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses, moving fast. She climbed out to find Caleb and Marcus mounted, along with 3 other men she didn't recognize, all of them armed. What's happening? She asked Danny, who was watching from the barn door. Wheeler's men cut our fence. Led about 50 head of cattle onto his property. Boss is going to get them back. Is that safe? Danny's expression was grim. Probably not. They rode out and Evelyn went back to her inventory. But she couldn't concentrate. She kept thinking about Caleb riding onto Wheeler's land, about guns and angry men and all the ways things could go wrong. The men came back 3 hours later, all of them, thank God. But Caleb's face was thunderous, and there was blood on Marcus's sleeve. What happened? Evelyn demanded, meeting them at the porch. Wheeler was there, Marcus said, dismounting carefully. His left arm hung stiff. Had 10 men with him, said the cattle wandered onto his land, so they were his now. Legal salvage or some such bullshit. That's not how salvage works, Danny muttered. Boss tried to negotiate, Marcus continued. Wheeler said he'd give us the cattle back for $1,000. Evelyn looked at Caleb. What did you do? Took the cattle anyway. His voice was hard. They're my cattle, on my land until his men cut my fence. I'm not paying him for my own property. Someone fired a shot, Marcus added. Don't know who. Grazed my arm, but it's just a scratch. Let me see, Evelyn said. She pulled Marcus into the kitchen and made him sit while she examined the wound. It was more than a scratch, a deep gouge along his upper arm that had bled considerably. But the bullet had missed bone and muscle. She cleaned it, stitched it, her hands steadier than they'd been with Tom, and wrapped it tight. You're getting good at this, Marcus observed. I'd rather not be. Caleb appeared in the doorway. How is he? Fine. Needs to keep it clean and dry. Change the bandage every day. Can he work? Light work. Nothing that involves the left arm for at least a week. Caleb nodded and left. Marcus stood, testing the movement. Thank you, Miss Evelyn. Just Evelyn is fine. Still, thank you. That night, the mood in the bunkhouse was tense. Evelyn could feel it when the men came in for dinner, an edge in their voices, a tightness in their shoulders. They ate quickly and spoke quietly, glancing at Caleb like they were waiting for him to say something. He didn't. After dinner, after the cleanup, Evelyn found him standing on the porch, staring out at the dark. You should eat more, she said. You barely touched your food. Not hungry. That's not an excuse. He glanced at her, something that might have been amusement flickering across his face. You sound like... He stopped. Like your wife? The amusement vanished. I was going to say like someone who cares whether I eat or not. I do care. You're my employer. If you collapse from not eating, I'm out of a job. Practical. Always. They stood in silence for a while. The night was clear and cold, stars sharp overhead. He's not going to stop, Caleb said finally. Wheeler. He'll keep pushing until I push back hard enough that he has to stop. What does that mean? I don't know yet. He turned to face her. But it might get ugly. If you want to leave, go back to town, find other work. I'd understand. Evelyn considered that. She could leave. Take her savings, she'd accumulated almost $60 now, and find something safer. A job in town, maybe. Or a ticket further west to one of the bigger cities. No, she said. No? I'm not leaving. This is my job, my home. I'm not running because some rich man thinks he can bully people into giving him what he wants. Caleb studied her face. You're sure? I'm sure. He nodded slowly. All right then. He went inside, leaving Evelyn alone with the stars, and the cold, and the growing certainty that she'd just committed herself to something more complicated than cooking and cleaning. The week after the cattle incident, Wheeler sent a formal letter. Chen brought it back from town, along with supplies and news that people were talking. Caleb read the letter standing at the kitchen table while Evelyn kneaded bread dough. His face got darker with each line. What does it say? She asked. He's filed a complaint with the territorial marshal, claims I stole his cattle and my men assaulted his workers. Caleb crumpled the paper. It's all lies, but it'll still tie me up in legal proceedings. Cost money I don't have for lawyers. Can you prove they were your cattle? They're branded, but Wheeler's claiming the brands were altered, that I rebranded his stock to cover the theft. That's insane. It's also hard to disprove if he's got men willing to lie for him. Caleb threw the letter on the table. He's smart. He knows I can't afford a long legal fight. He's betting I'll settle. Give him what he wants just to make it stop. What are you going to do? Fight it. I'm not giving that bastard an inch. But fighting costs money, and money was something the ranch had in limited supply. Evelyn learned this over the next few days as Caleb went through the books with Chen, calculating and recalculating their position. They were solvent, barely. But legal fees would eat through their reserves fast. And if the case dragged on into spring, they wouldn't have enough to pay the men or buy supplies for the season. Evelyn listened from the kitchen, pretending to work while actually absorbing every word. That night, she went through her own finances. $63. Not much, but it was something. She found Caleb in his office, still hunched over the ledger. I have money, she said without preamble. $63. You can have it. He looked up, startled. What? For the legal fees, I know it's not much, but no. It's my money. I can do what I want with it. And I'm saying no. He stood. That's your savings, Evelyn. Everything you've earned. I'm not taking it. Why not? You need it. Not that badly. His voice was firm. You keep your money. That's an order. You can't order me what to do with my own wages. I can when you're trying to give them back to me out of some misplaced sense of loyalty. He moved around the desk. I appreciate the offer, genuinely, but no. They stood facing each other, neither backing down. You're stubborn, Evelyn said. So are you. At least I'm being practical. So am I. You need that money. Things go bad here. You'll need it to start over somewhere else. I told you I'm not leaving. You might not have a choice. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Is it that bad? Evelyn asked quietly. Caleb rubbed his face. He looked tired, more tired than she'd ever seen him. I don't know, maybe. Wheeler's got resources I don't have, connections. If he really pushes, if he's willing to spend what it takes, he trailed off. Then we'll figure it out, Evelyn said. All of us, together. He looked at her for a long moment. You really mean that? I wouldn't say it if I didn't. Something shifted in his expression, softened. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone who'd run at the first sign of trouble. Most people do. He paused. You keep not running. Maybe I'm just stubborn. Maybe. He almost smiled. Or maybe you're exactly what this place needs. Before Evelyn could respond, Danny burst through the door. Boss, you need to see this. They followed him outside. The eastern sky was lit up orange. Fire. Not close, but not far enough either, and the wind was blowing toward them. That's the Johnson place, Marcus said, appearing from the barn. Or was. How far? Caleb demanded. 5 miles, maybe 6. Anyone there? Johnson's moved to Denver last month. Place has been empty since. But Caleb was already moving, shouting orders. Get every bucket we have. Fill the water troughs. Wet down the barn roof. If that fire jumps the creek, it'll come straight for us. The men scattered. Evelyn ran for the kitchen, grabbing every pot and bucket she could find. She filled them from the pump, moving as fast as her arms would allow. The fire grew brighter, closer. She could smell smoke now, acrid and wrong. For 2 hours they worked, soaking the roofs, clearing brush away from the buildings, hauling water until Evelyn's arms screamed. The men worked in grim silence, eyes on the orange glow that kept creeping closer. Then the wind shifted. Just like that, the danger passed. The fire turned east, away from them, eating through empty grassland instead of toward the ranch. Everyone stopped to watch it go, breathing hard, covered in soot and sweat despite the cold. That was close, Danny said. Too close, Caleb agreed. He turned to look at his men, at Evelyn standing there with her skirt soaked and ash in her hair. Good work, all of you. They trudged back to the house. Evelyn made coffee while the men collapsed at the table, too tired to do more than stare at their cups. You think it was natural? Marcus asked. The fire? In November? After a week of frost? Caleb shook his head. Someone said it. Wheeler, Danny said flatly. Can't prove it. Don't need to prove it. We all know. Caleb didn't argue. Neither did anyone else. Evelyn set down the coffee pot. If he's willing to burn people out, what's to stop him from doing worse? Nothing, Caleb said. That's the point. He's escalating, testing how far he can push before we break. So what do? We don't break. But his voice lacked conviction, and they all heard it. The next morning, Evelyn rode into town with Chen. Not for supplies, they'd just gone the week before. But she had an idea, and it required information she couldn't get at the ranch. She found Sarah at the general store sweeping the porch. Evelyn, twice in 1 month, this is becoming a habit. I need to ask you something about Martin Wheeler. Sarah's expression shifted, curiosity giving way to caution. What about him? What do people in town think of him? That's a dangerous question. I know, I'm asking anyway. Sarah glanced around, making sure they were alone. People are scared of him. He owns half the businesses in town, controls the freight company, the feed store, the land office. You cross him, you lose your livelihood. What about the marshal? Can't he do anything? Marshal Davies? Sarah laughed bitterly. Wheeler pays his salary. You think he's going to bite the hand that feeds him? So Wheeler just gets to do whatever he wants? That's how it works out here. Money talks. Everyone else just tries to stay out of the way. Sarah's voice dropped. Why are you asking? Because he's coming after Caleb Turner, and someone needs to stop him. You can't stop Martin Wheeler. Nobody can. Maybe nobody's tried hard enough. Evelyn went to the land office next. The clerk was a nervous man with ink-stained fingers who clearly didn't want to be there. I need to see the property records for Turner Ranch and Wheeler's holdings, she said. Those are public, but what? But Mr. Wheeler doesn't like people looking into his business. Is he here right now? Well, no, but then show me the records. The clerk hesitated, then sighed and pulled out a heavy ledger. Evelyn spent the next hour going through it, making notes on paper she'd brought for the purpose. Wheeler's property surrounded Caleb's on 3 sides. He'd bought up every adjacent parcel over the past 5 years, slowly encircling Turner Ranch like a noose. The only direction Caleb could expand was north, into rougher country that was barely suitable for grazing. But there was something else, something that made Evelyn's pulse quicken. Wheeler's last 2 purchases, acquired just 6 months ago, had been bought from men who'd left the territory suddenly. One had supposedly gone back east for family reasons. The other had just disappeared, his property sold at auction for unpaid debts. These men, Evelyn said, pointing to the names. Do you know what happened to them? The clerk looked uncomfortable. I heard stories. What kind of stories? The kind people don't talk about in broad daylight. Tell me anyway. He glanced toward the door, then leaned closer. Bill Hutchins, the one who went east. His barn burned down 2 weeks before he sold. Lost most of his stock. The other one, Sam Porter, had his water source poisoned, same as what happened to Turner a few years back. After that, he couldn't prove who did it, Couldn't afford to fight it, so he just left. And Wheeler bought their land at rock-bottom prices. Yeah, Evelyn felt cold. He's done this before. Nobody can prove anything. But yeah, there's a pattern if you look for it. She thanked the clerk and left, her mind racing. Wheeler wasn't just trying to buy Caleb out. He was using intimidation, sabotage, and legal manipulation to force people off their land so he could buy it cheap. It was methodical, calculated, and it had worked at least twice before. Back at the ranch, she found Caleb in the barn, working on a saddle that had a broken strap. "I went to the land office," she said. He looked up, surprised. "Why?" "Because I wanted to see if Wheeler's done this before. And he has. At least twice that I could find, maybe more." She told him everything the clerk had said. Caleb listened in silence, his face getting harder with each detail. "I knew about Hutchins and Porter," he said when she finished. "Didn't know the full story. Didn't realize it was the same pattern. He's going to do the same thing to you. Push until you can't fight back, then buy your land for nothing." "I know. So what are we going to do about it?" Caleb set down the saddle. "We? This isn't your fight, Evelyn. Like hell it isn't. I live here. I work here. If Wheeler forces you out, where does that leave me?" She crossed her arms. "This is my fight whether you like it or not." He studied her, that measuring look again. "You're really not going to back down, are you?" "No, even if it gets dangerous?" "Even then." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded, something like respect in his eyes. "All right. Then we fight smart. Document everything. Build a case that even Wheeler's money can't buy his way out of. It'll take time, but we don't have time. He's escalating. The fire, the cattle, the lawsuit. He's not going to wait for us to build a case." "What do you suggest?" Evelyn had been thinking about this all the way back from town. "We go public, make noise. Make it so that if anything happens to you or the ranch, everyone knows who's responsible. Wheeler owns half the people in town. They're not going to speak against him. Maybe not. But if enough people are paying attention, he'll have to be more careful. He's gotten away with this because nobody was watching. We make sure everyone watches." Caleb considered that. It could work, or it could make him move faster. Either way, we're better off than sitting here waiting for him to make the next move. "You've thought this through. I had a long wagon ride." He almost smiled. "All right, we'll try it your way. But Evelyn," "What?" "If this goes wrong, if things get bad, you get out. Promise me that." "I'm not promising anything except that I'll be here tomorrow morning making breakfast like always." This time he did smile. Small, barely there, but real. "Stubborn." "You mentioned that already." That night, Evelyn wrote a letter. She wrote it carefully, laying out everything she'd learned about Wheeler's pattern of land acquisition. The mysterious fires, the poisoned water, the legal harassment, the men who'd been driven off their property, and the convenient timing of Wheeler's purchases. She didn't have proof of anything specific, but she had a timeline, a pattern, and enough questions to make people wonder. She gave the letter to Chen the next morning. "Take this to the newspaper in Denver," she said. "Not Ashford. Wheeler probably owns the paper there. Denver's far enough that he doesn't control it." Chen looked at the sealed envelope. "This is going to make him angry." "That's the idea." "Boss know you're doing this?" "It was his idea." That was stretching the truth, but only slightly. "Just get it there. And Chen, be careful. Don't let anyone know what you're carrying." He nodded and left. For the next week, they waited. Life continued. Cooking, cleaning, mending, the endless routine of ranch work. But there was tension underneath it all, a sense of waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped 2 weeks later. The newspaper published her letter, not on the front page, but prominently enough. The headline read, "Pattern of Intimidation in Western Territories, One Woman's Account." Chen brought back 3 copies. Evelyn read it standing at the kitchen table, her heart pounding. They'd printed everything, every detail, every question, every implication. "This is going to cause trouble," Danny said, reading over her shoulder. "That's the point," Caleb replied. But his voice was tight. The trouble came faster than any of them expected. 2 days later, Marshal Davies arrived with a warrant. Caleb was being charged with theft of livestock, destruction of property, and assault. "This is ridiculous," Danny protested. "We have witnesses." Wheeler has more witnesses, Davies interrupted. And a judge who's willing to issue a warrant. Turner, you need to come with me. For how long? Caleb asked, his voice level. Until the hearing, probably a week. A week? Caleb looked at Danny. You're in charge. Keep the men working. Don't do anything stupid. Boss, that's an order. They took him away in handcuffs. Evelyn watched from the porch, fury building in her chest. This was Wheeler's response to her letter, a power play, a demonstration that he could still do whatever he wanted. That night, the men gathered in the kitchen. 17 faces, all looking at Danny, waiting for orders. We keep working, Danny said. Same as always. Boss will beat this. It's all lies anyway. Meanwhile, we hold down the fort. What about Wheeler? One of the Sullivan brothers asked. He's not going to stop just because the boss is in jail. Then we stay alert, double the watches, keep eyes on the boundaries. Anything suspicious, you report to me immediately. The men dispersed, but the tension remained. Evelyn found Danny afterward, staring at the books Caleb had left open. Can you do this? She asked. Run the ranch? Yeah, I've done it before when the boss was away. He looked up at her. But I'm not Caleb. The men respect me, but they don't follow me the same way. Then we'll figure it out together. We? You handle the men and the work. I'll handle everything else, supplies, finances, whatever needs doing. Danny looked skeptical. No offense, but you're the housekeeper. I'm also the person who went through Wheeler's land records and wrote that letter. I'm also the person who set Tom's arm and stitched up Marcus and kept this household running for 3 months. I'm capable of more than cooking. She met his eyes. Let me help. He studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right, but if you need something, you ask. Don't try to handle everything alone. Same goes for you. They shook hands on it. The next 5 days tested everything. Evelyn managed the household, kept the men fed, handled the accounts, and tried not to think about Caleb sitting in a jail cell because she'd written that letter. Danny ran the ranch operations, coordinating work details and keeping morale up. But the strain showed on him. He wasn't sleeping much, and he jumped at every unexpected sound. On the 6th day, smoke appeared on the southern horizon. Not the Johnson place this time. Closer. Much closer. Evelyn was the first to see it. She ran to find Danny, who was working on the fence with Marcus and Pete. Fire, she said, pointing. They turned to look. The smoke was thick and black, rising fast. That's the south pasture, Marcus said, where we moved the herd yesterday. Danny's face went white. The cattle, they ran for horses. Evelyn ran for buckets. By the time the men rode out, she'd organized everyone who remained into a water brigade, just in case the fire spread to the buildings. It was the longest hour of her life. When the men finally came back, they were covered in soot and ash. Their faces told the story before their words did. Lost 30 head, Danny said, his voice hollow. Maybe more. They panicked, ran into the fire. We saved what we could, but 30 head, Evelyn repeated. That was thousands of dollars. Money they didn't have. It was set, Marcus added. Found the remains of a torch. Someone lit this deliberately. Wheeler, Pete said. Nobody disagreed. Evelyn helped tend the men's burns, mostly minor but painful. She made food that nobody wanted to eat. She listened to Danny pace in the main room, muttering calculations and curses in equal measure. That night, she stood alone on the porch, looking out at the dark where the fire had been. They were losing. Wheeler was winning, piece by piece, blow by blow. And with Caleb in jail, they had no way to fight back effectively. Unless... The thought that had been forming in the back of her mind crystallized suddenly, sharp and clear. She went inside and found Danny. I need to go to town tomorrow, she said. For what? To see the marshal, to see Caleb, and to do something I should have done 2 weeks ago. What's that? Make Wheeler face me directly. Danny shook his head. That's a bad idea. Maybe, but it's the only one I've got. She rode into town the next morning before anyone could stop her. Found Marshal Davies at his office, looking uncomfortable when she walked in. I need to see Caleb Turner, she said. Visiting hours are now. I need to see him now. Something in her voice must have convinced him, because he led her to the cells without further argument. Caleb stood when he saw her. He looked tired, unshaven, but his eyes were sharp. "What are you doing here?" "They burned the south pasture, lost 30 head. His jaw tightened. "Anyone hurt?" "Just minor burns. But Danny's struggling, and the men are scared, and I can't—" She stopped, surprised by the emotion choking her voice. "I can't fix this from the ranch, so I'm going to Wheeler directly." "No, it's not your decision." "Like hell it isn't. Evelyn, Wheeler's dangerous. You confront him. He'll—" "What? Burn my property? Kill my cattle? Put me in jail on false charges? He's already doing all of that to you." She gripped the cell bars. "Someone has to face him. Someone has to call him out publicly where he can't hide behind lawyers and corrupt marshals. And you think that should be you? I think I'm the only one who can right now." Caleb stared at her, conflict clear on his face. "If you do this, there's no going back. He'll come after you. He's already coming after all of us. At least this way I'm choosing the fight instead of waiting for it to find me." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached through the bars and took her hand. His grip was warm, calloused, solid. "Be smart," he said. "Don't go alone. Don't meet him anywhere private. And Evelyn?" "Yes?" "Come back." She squeezed his hand. "I will." She found Martin Wheeler at the finest hotel in Ashford, holding court in the restaurant like a king receiving subjects. He was older than she'd expected, maybe 50, with silver hair and expensive clothes that looked out of place in the rough territory town. Evelyn walked straight to his table. "Mr. Wheeler, I'm Evelyn Harper. I work for Caleb Turner." The conversation around them died. Wheeler looked up, his expression politely curious. "Miss Harper, I've heard about you." His voice was smooth, cultured. "You're the one who wrote that fascinating letter to the Denver paper." "I am." "Quite imaginative, though I'm afraid it was based more on speculation than fact." "Was the fire at the Johnson place speculation? What about the one at Turner Ranch yesterday that killed 30 cattle?" His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "I heard about that unfortunate accident. Terrible thing. Fires. So unpredictable. Especially when they're set deliberately. That's a serious accusation, Miss Harper. One you'd be wise not to repeat without evidence." "I have plenty of evidence. I have a pattern. I have witnesses. And I have a newspaper willing to print all of it." She leaned forward. "What I want to know is why. Why do this? Why destroy people who've done nothing to you?" Wheeler set down his fork carefully. "This is a civilized conversation, Miss Harper. Let's keep it that way. Answer the question." "Very well." He dabbed his mouth with his napkin. "I'm a businessman. I see opportunity, I pursue it. Mr. Turner has land I want. I've made him generous offers. He's refused. That's his choice, of course. Just as it's my choice to pursue my interests through other means. Legal harassment, arson, intimidation, business negotiations." He smiled. "Though I appreciate your passion. It's refreshing. Most women out here are too timid for such confrontations." The condescension in his voice made her want to throw something. Instead, she straightened. "I came here to tell you something, Mr. Wheeler. You will not win. Whatever you do to Caleb Turner, to his ranch, to his people, we will fight you, publicly, loudly, until everyone in this territory knows exactly what kind of man you are." "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise." Wheeler studied her, his smile fading. "You're making a mistake, Miss Harper. A serious one. Mr. Turner will lose his ranch. That's inevitable. The only question is whether you'll go down with him." "I guess we'll see." She turned and walked out, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. Outside, she leaned against the wall and took several deep breaths. She'd done it, confronted him, called him out, and now she had no idea what would happen next. The ride back to the ranch felt longer than it should have. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every sound made Evelyn's pulse jump. She'd challenged Martin Wheeler publicly, in front of witnesses, and now she had to live with whatever came next. Chen was waiting when she arrived, his face tight with worry. "Danny's been looking for you, said it was urgent." Evelyn dismounted and hurried inside. She found Danny in Caleb's office, surrounded by papers, his hair standing on end like he'd been running his hands through it. "Tell me you didn't do what I think you did," he said, without looking up. "If you think I confronted Wheeler at his hotel in front of half the town, then yes, I did exactly that." Danny's head snapped up. Are you insane? Probably. What's the urgent news? He stood, holding out a telegram. This came an hour ago. The judge moved up Caleb's hearing. It's tomorrow morning instead of next week. That's good, isn't it? He gets out sooner. Or gets convicted sooner. Wheeler's judge, remember? And with you confronting him today? Danny shook his head. You just gave him more reason to throw the book at Caleb. Make an example. Evelyn's stomach dropped. She hadn't thought about that, hadn't considered that her actions might make things worse for Caleb instead of better. We need a lawyer, she said. Can't afford one. Not a good one, anyway. Then we'll defend him ourselves. Evelyn, we have documentation. We have witnesses. We have a timeline that shows Wheeler's been doing this to people for years. She moved to the desk, shuffling through the papers. Where's the file I started? The one with all the land records? Here, but get it. We're going to present it tomorrow. Show the judge exactly what's been happening. The judge works for Wheeler. Then we make sure everyone else in that courtroom hears it too. If we can't win legally, we'll win in the court of public opinion. Danny looked at her like she'd grown a second head. You really think that'll work? I think it's all we've got. They worked through the night. Evelyn organized every document, every piece of evidence, every witness statement they could gather. Danny rode out to bring in Old Tom and Marcus. They'd both seen Wheeler's men cutting the fence. Chen contributed his own observations about the fire at the Johnson place. By dawn, they had something that resembled a defense. Whether it would be enough was another question. The courtroom was packed. Apparently word had spread about the hearing, and half of Ashford had turned out to watch. Evelyn recognized faces from the general store, the boarding house, the saloon. Sarah sat in the second row, her eyes wide. Wheeler sat in the front, flanked by two lawyers in expensive suits. He looked calm, confident, like a man who knew the outcome before the trial even started. Caleb was brought in wearing handcuffs. His eyes found Evelyn immediately, and something passed between them. Concern, gratitude, something else she couldn't name. Judge Harlan presided. He was older, thin, with a face like carved wood. He didn't look at Caleb once as he opened the proceedings. The Territory versus Turner. Charges are theft of livestock, destruction of property, and assault. How does the defendant plead? Not guilty, Caleb said clearly. Very well. Mr. Peterson, present your case. Wheeler's lead lawyer stood. He was good. Evelyn could tell that within the first minute. He laid out the charges methodically, painting Caleb as a violent man who'd stolen cattle and attacked Wheeler's workers when confronted. He called witnesses. 3 of Wheeler's ranch hands testified that they'd seen Caleb take cattle that didn't belong to him, that he'd threatened them, that one of them had been injured in the confrontation. It was all lies, but they told it convincingly. When Peterson finished, Judge Harlan looked at Caleb. Does the defendant have representation? No, Your Honor. I'll speak for myself. Very well. Present your defense. Caleb stood. He didn't have the polish of Wheeler's lawyer, but he had something else. Presence. The courtroom quieted when he spoke. Everything you just heard is a lie. Those cattle were mine, branded with my mark. Wheeler's men cut my fence and drove them onto his property, then tried to claim them as salvage. He pulled out the documentation Evelyn had prepared. I have records showing— Objection, Peterson interrupted. The defendant's own records are hardly impartial evidence. Sustained, Judge Harlan said without looking at the papers. Caleb's jaw tightened. I also have witnesses. Men who saw Wheeler's hands cutting my fence. Call them forward. Marcus and Old Tom testified. They were honest, straightforward, describing exactly what they'd seen. But Peterson tore into them on cross-examination, suggesting they were loyal to Caleb and would say anything to protect him. By the time they sat down, their testimony had been shredded. Evelyn watched the judge's face. He looked bored, uninterested, like he'd already made up his mind. Peterson called his final witness, one of Wheeler's hands who claimed Caleb had struck him during the confrontation. He had a bruise on his face to prove it. And what happened after Mr. Turner attacked you? Peterson asked. I fell, hit my head, was unconscious for several minutes. And when you woke? My cattle were gone, stolen. It was masterful, completely fabricated, but masterful. Judge Harlan leaned back. Does the defense have anything else? Caleb looked at the papers in his hands, at the evidence that the judge wouldn't consider, at the witnesses who'd been dismissed as biased. No, Your Honor. Then I'm ready to render. I have something. Evelyn stood up from the gallery. Every head in the courtroom turned. Judge Harlan frowned. And who are you? Evelyn Harper. I work for Mr. Turner. This is highly irregular. I have evidence that's relevant to this case. Evidence about a pattern of behavior by Martin Wheeler that directly relates to the charges against Mr. Turner. Wheeler leaned forward, his eyes narrow. Your Honor, Peterson objected, this woman is not a lawyer. She has no standing to— I'm a citizen of this territory, Evelyn interrupted, and I have information this court needs to hear. Judge Harlan looked annoyed, but the crowd was murmuring, watching. He couldn't dismiss her without looking like he had something to hide. You have 5 minutes, he said. Evelyn moved to the front, her heart hammering. She'd never spoken in public like this, never stood in front of dozens of people and presented an argument, but she'd also never let fear stop her from doing what needed doing. Martin Wheeler has a pattern, she began. Over the past 5 years, he's acquired 7 properties bordering his own. Every single one was purchased under similar circumstances: fire, poisoned water, legal harassment. The owners were driven out, unable to fight back, and Wheeler bought their land for a fraction of its value. Objection! Peterson was on his feet. This is speculation and has no bearing on— I have documentation. Evelyn held up the file. Land records showing the purchases. Witness statements describing the incidents. A timeline that shows the same pattern repeating over and over. Your Honor, this is a witch hunt. Let her speak, someone called from the gallery. Others murmured agreement. Judge Harlan hesitated, then nodded curtly. Continue, but make it relevant. Evelyn laid out everything. Bill Hutchins and his mysterious barn fire. Sam Porter and his poisoned well. The Johnson place that had burned just weeks ago, conveniently before Wheeler made an offer on the land. She showed how each incident was followed by legal pressure. Lawsuits, harassment, forcing the owners to sell or abandon their property. And now the same thing is happening to Caleb Turner, she said. His fence cut, his cattle stolen, his property burned. And when he tried to recover his own livestock, he was arrested on false charges brought by the same man who's been systematically destroying anyone who won't sell to him. The courtroom was dead silent. These charges aren't about theft or assault, Evelyn continued. They're about intimidation, about using the legal system to punish someone for refusing to give Martin Wheeler what he wants. She turned to face Wheeler directly. And it needs to stop. Peterson was shouting objections. Judge Harlan was banging his gavel, but the crowd was buzzing, people talking to their neighbors, looking at Wheeler with new eyes. Miss Harper, the judge said sharply, you've made serious accusations without proof. I have proof. It's all here. She set the file on his desk. Land records, witness statements, documentation of every suspicious incident. If you won't look at it, I'll make sure the newspapers do. Wheeler stood. Your Honor, this is outrageous. I demand— You demand? Evelyn turned on him. You've been terrorizing this valley for years, and you have the nerve to demand anything? Enough! Judge Harlan's gavel cracked like a gunshot. Miss Harper, sit down. Mr. Wheeler, you too. He looked shaken now, aware of all the eyes watching him. I'm calling a recess. We'll reconvene in 1 hour. The courtroom erupted in conversation the moment he left. Evelyn made her way back to her seat, her legs trembling. Danny grabbed her arm. That was either brilliant or suicidal, he muttered. Maybe both. Caleb was being led back to the cells, but he caught her eye. Mouthed the words, "Thank you." The hour passed slowly. Evelyn sat in the courtroom while people filed in and out, everyone talking about what she'd said. Wheeler remained in the front row, his face like stone. When Judge Harlan returned, the room fell silent. I've reviewed the evidence presented by Miss Harper, he said. His voice was careful. While much of it is circumstantial, there are enough questions raised that I cannot in good conscience proceed with this case as presented. Peterson shot to his feet. Your Honor, I'm dismissing the charges against Caleb Turner. However, he looked at Caleb. I'm also issuing a restraining order. You are to stay off Martin Wheeler's property, no contact with his workers. Any violation will result in immediate arrest. Understood, Caleb said. Furthermore, I'm requesting that the territorial marshal investigate the incidents Miss Harper documented. If there's merit to her claims, appropriate action will be taken. Wheeler's face went red. This is an outrage. This is my ruling. Judge Harlan's voice was cold. Court dismissed. Caleb was released immediately. He walked out of the courthouse a free man, and the crowd that had gathered parted to let him through. Evelyn waited on the steps, and when he reached her, he stopped. You didn't have to do that, he said quietly. Yes, I did. You made an enemy today, a powerful one. I made several powerful enemies today. Wheeler, the judge, probably half the businessmen in this town who benefit from looking the other way. And you're not scared? Evelyn thought about that. I'm terrified, but I'm also tired of watching him destroy people. Someone had to stand up. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, he smiled. Really smiled, warm and genuine. You're something else, Evelyn Harper. Before she could respond, Danny appeared with the horses. We should get moving. Town's buzzing, and not all of it's friendly. The ride back to the ranch was tense. They kept watching the road behind them, expecting trouble. But nothing came. At the ranch, the men were waiting. When they saw Caleb, a cheer went up. He dismounted and immediately started asking questions about the cattle, the fence repairs, everything that had happened while he was gone. Evelyn slipped away to the kitchen. She had dinner to prepare, and the routine felt comforting after the chaos of the courtroom. She was peeling potatoes when Caleb found her. The men can cook for themselves tonight, he said. They'll burn everything. Probably, but you've earned a rest. I'm fine, Evelyn. He moved closer. You stood up in front of the whole town and accused the most powerful man in the territory of crimes. You documented his pattern, presented evidence, and forced a corrupt judge to let me go. That's not fine. That's extraordinary. I just did what needed doing. You did more than that. He paused. Why? Why what? Why risk so much for this? For me? You could have stayed out of it, kept your head down, collected your wages, and minded your own business. Evelyn set down the knife. Because it's not just your fight anymore. It's mine too. This is my home. These are my people. And I'll be damned if I let some rich bastard take it away because he thinks he can. Caleb studied her face. When did that happen? When did this become your home? I don't know. Somewhere between setting Tom's arm and burning my hands on that stove and organizing your defense. She met his eyes. I didn't plan it. It just happened. I'm glad it did. The air between them shifted, thickened. Evelyn became acutely aware of how close he was standing, how his eyes weren't cold or assessing now, but warm, open. Caleb? Boss! Danny's voice shattered the moment. He appeared in the doorway, breathing hard. We've got a problem. What now? Riders, coming fast from the south, at least a dozen. Caleb was moving before Danny finished speaking. Evelyn followed them outside where the men were already gathering, armed and tense. The riders appeared over the rise. But these weren't Wheeler's men. That's the marshal, Marcus said, and he's got deputies. Marshal Davies rode up with 10 men behind him, all of them armed, all of them looking serious. Turner, Davies called out, we need to talk. About what? About the fire at Wheeler's North Barn. Burned to the ground last night. He's saying you did it. I was in jail last night. You got out this morning. He's saying you did it on your way back here. Revenge for the charges. Caleb's expression went cold. That's a lie. Maybe, but I've got witnesses who say they saw riders from your ranch near Wheeler's property around the time the fire started. What witnesses? Wheeler's men. Of course they are. Caleb looked at Danny. Were any of our men near Wheeler's property last night? No, everyone was here or on the East Range, nowhere near his place. Davies shifted in his saddle. Look, Turner, I don't want trouble, but I've got to investigate this. Wheeler's filed a complaint. I need to bring you in for questioning. You just let me out this morning, and now I need to bring you back. That's how this works. How convenient for Wheeler. Every time he burns something, he blames me, and you arrest me. Caleb's voice was hard. How much is he paying you, Davies? That's out of line. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, you're his personal attack dog. He points, you bite. Davies' face flushed. I'm upholding the law. You're upholding Wheeler's version of it. The tension ratcheted up. The deputies shifted, hands moving toward weapons. Turner's men spread out, ready for whatever came next. Evelyn stepped forward before things could escalate. "Marshal Davies," she said clearly, "Caleb Turner was at this ranch all night. I can testify to that. You're his employee. Your testimony is biased. Then ask Danny, ask Marcus, ask any of the 17 men who were here and can confirm he never left the property. Wheeler's witnesses are lying, just like they lied about the cattle, just like they lied about the assault. How many times are you going to believe them before you realize they're not credible?" Davies looked uncomfortable. "I still need to bring him in." "No," Evelyn said flatly. "You don't. You need to investigate the fire, yes, but you don't need to arrest a man who has 17 witnesses placing him somewhere else. Unless you want to explain to the territorial governor why you're harassing an innocent rancher on behalf of Martin Wheeler." "The governor? I sent a letter to the Denver newspaper. I can just as easily send one to the governor's office, detailing every incident, every false arrest, every time you've acted as Wheeler's enforcer instead of an impartial lawman." She paused. "How do you think that'll play?" The marshal's jaw worked. He knew he was caught. Either back down or escalate into something he couldn't control. "Fine," he said finally. "I'll investigate. But Turner, you stay available for questioning. Don't leave the territory." "Wasn't planning on it." Davies and his men rode off. The moment they were out of sight, Caleb turned to Evelyn. "You threatened the marshal with the governor?" "I don't actually know the governor." "You don't?" He laughed. Actually laughed. Tension breaking. "You're bluffing." "Worked, didn't it?" Danny was grinning. "She's got you there, boss." But the humor faded quickly. Wheeler had burned his own barn and blamed Caleb, which meant he was getting desperate. And desperate men did dangerous things. "Double the watches," Caleb ordered. "Nobody works alone. Everyone stays armed. If you see anything suspicious, you sound the alarm immediately." The men dispersed to their posts. Evelyn went back to the kitchen, but she couldn't focus on cooking. Her hands shook as she tried to chop vegetables. She'd made another enemy today. The marshal. And she'd pushed Wheeler harder, backing him into a corner. What would he do next? The answer came 3 nights later. Evelyn woke to the smell of smoke. Not the clean smell of cook fire, but something chemical. Wrong. She stumbled out of bed and ran to the window. Orange light flickered against the darkness. The barn was burning. She grabbed her robe and ran downstairs, shouting. Men were already pouring out of the bunkhouse, buckets in hand, but the fire was too big, too hot, spreading too fast. "Everyone back!" Caleb yelled. "It's going to collapse!" They watched helplessly as the barn burned. The horses had been moved to the far pasture earlier that week, thank God. But equipment, saddles, tools, everything stored inside was lost. The roof fell in with a crash that sent sparks 50 feet into the air. "Look," Marcus said, pointing. In the light of the flames, Evelyn could see riders on the ridge. Maybe 6 of them, just sitting there, watching. Wheeler's men. "Get the rifles," Danny said, his voice shaking with rage. "No," Caleb ordered. "That's what they want, an excuse to say we attacked them. They just burned our barn, and we can't prove it, but if we shoot at them, Davies will have us all in jail by morning." The riders stayed for another minute, making sure they'd been seen. Then they turned and disappeared into the darkness. The barn burned until dawn. By the time the sun came up, all that remained was a smoking foundation and a few charred posts. Caleb stood staring at the ruins, his face expressionless. "How much?" Danny asked quietly. 3,000 in equipment, maybe more, plus the cost of rebuilding. Caleb's voice was flat. "We don't have it. We'll figure something out." "Will we? We lost 30 head to fire. Now all our equipment. Winter's coming. If we can't get hay stored, if we can't maintain the tools we need." He trailed off. Evelyn walked over to them. "We're not giving up." "Evelyn, I mean it. This is exactly what Wheeler wants. He wants us demoralized, broken, ready to quit." She looked at the ruins, then back at Caleb. "But we're not going to give him that satisfaction." "With what money?" "We'll find it. We'll sell something, borrow, I don't know, but we'll figure it out." Caleb looked at her, and she saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of everything that had happened. "You really believe that?" "I have to, because the alternative is letting him win." Over the next week, they took stock of the damage. It was worse than they'd thought. Not just the barn, but fencing materials, winter feed, spare parts for equipment, all gone. Evelyn went through the finances with Chen. They were underwater. Even if they sold cattle, which they couldn't afford to do with the herd already depleted, they wouldn't have enough to rebuild and make it through winter. "We need a loan," Chen said. "From who? Wheeler owns the bank." "Then we go to Denver. Find a bank there." "With what collateral? We're barely solvent as it is." They sat in frustrated silence. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She paced her room, her mind churning through options and rejecting them all. Every path led to the same place, financial ruin. Unless. She went downstairs and found Caleb in his office, surrounded by papers, looking as sleepless as she felt. "I have an idea," she said. "You're going to hate it. At this point, I'll consider anything. We go public again. Not with accusations this time. With the truth. We tell everyone exactly what's happening, show them the burned barn, the killed cattle, document Wheeler's campaign, and ask for help. People won't help. They're too scared of Wheeler." "Some of them will. The ones who've been through this before, the ones who hate what he's doing but feel powerless to stop it." She sat across from him. "We're not the only ones he's hurt, but we might be the first ones to fight back publicly. If we can show people it's possible to stand up to him, they might stand with us. Maybe, maybe not. But it's better than going down quietly." Caleb rubbed his face. "You know, if we do this, there's no turning back. He'll come at us with everything he has. He's already doing that." "Fair point?" He looked at her. "Why are you still here, Evelyn? You could leave. Take your savings, start over somewhere Wheeler can't touch you." "I could ask you the same thing. Why not sell? Take whatever Wheeler offers and walk away." "Because it's my land, my legacy, my father's—" He stopped. "It matters to me. This place matters to me too. These people. This fight." She leaned forward. "I'm not leaving. Not because I'm brave or noble or any of that. I'm staying because I don't know how to quit something that matters." Something shifted in his expression. "When this is over, if we survive this, I'd like to take you to dinner, properly, in town, like civilized people." Evelyn felt her heart skip. "Is that an invitation or a threat?" "Probably both." "Then yes, when this is over you can buy me dinner." "It's a date." They spent the next day preparing their appeal. Evelyn wrote it out carefully, documenting every incident, every attack, every attempt Wheeler had made to destroy them. She didn't exaggerate, didn't need to. The facts were damning enough. Chen took it to Denver, to newspapers beyond Wheeler's control. Within 3 days, the story was everywhere. The response was immediate and split. Half the territory condemned them for causing trouble, for attacking a prominent businessman without proof, for being ungrateful troublemakers who didn't know their place. The other half rallied. Donations arrived, small amounts mostly, $5 here, 10 there. A neighboring rancher sent lumber. Another sent grain for the horses. A woman in town organized a collection of tools and equipment from people who wanted to help. It wasn't enough to solve everything, but it was something. More importantly, it was hope. Wheeler responded by filing another lawsuit. Defamation this time, seeking $10,000 in damages. "He's trying to bleed us dry with legal fees," Danny said, reading the court papers. "Let him try," Evelyn replied. "Every lawsuit is more attention, more people paying attention to what he's doing." But attention was a double-edged sword. 2 nights after the lawsuit was filed, someone took a shot at Caleb. He'd been walking from the barn, the temporary structure they'd built to replace the burned one, to the house. The bullet missed by inches, hitting the post beside his head. Everyone hit the ground. Men poured out of the bunkhouse, rifles ready. But whoever fired was already gone. They found the spot where the shooter had waited. Boot prints, a spent cartridge, nothing else. "That was a warning," Marcus said, examining the angle of the shot. "Anyone who can hit that post from this distance could have hit Caleb if they wanted to." "So what's the message?" Danny asked. "Back off, or next time they won't miss." Caleb looked at the bullet hole in the post, then at Evelyn, who'd come running at the sound of gunfire. "You should go," he said quietly. "This has gone past intimidation. They're willing to kill now." "Then we all should go." "They're after me specifically. The rest of you, are just as much a target, Evelyn interrupted. You think they'll spare us if they kill you? We're all in this now, together. The men murmured agreement. Nobody was leaving. Caleb looked around at their faces, stubborn, scared, but determined. All right, but we do this smart. Nobody goes anywhere alone. We work in pairs, minimum, armed at all times, and we finish this quickly, one way or another. How? Danny asked. We force Wheeler's hand, make him do something so public, so undeniable, that even his bought judges can't ignore it. And how do we do that? Caleb smiled grimly. We hurt him where it counts, his reputation. Over the next week, they built their case. Not legal evidence. That hadn't worked. Public opinion. Evelyn wrote letters to everyone she could think of. Newspapers, politicians, businessmen in other territories. Anyone who might care that Martin Wheeler was using violence and intimidation to steal land. Some ignored her, but enough responded that Wheeler's name started appearing in papers across the territory. Questions were raised, investigations suggested. His business partners in Denver started getting nervous about the association. Wheeler's response was to accelerate. The attacks came faster. Fences cut every night, cattle scattered, equipment sabotaged. Always at night, always untraceable, always just damaging enough to cost money they didn't have. They were bleeding out slowly, and everyone knew it. Then came the night everything changed. Evelyn was in the kitchen preparing breakfast before dawn. She heard horses outside. Too many horses. She ran to the window and saw flames. Not the barn this time. The house. The main house. Her house. Fire was spreading up the side wall, eating through the dry wood with terrifying speed. She screamed. Men came running. But even as they grabbed buckets, Evelyn knew it was hopeless. The fire was too big, spreading too fast. Everyone out, Caleb shouted. Get clear of the building. Evelyn ran upstairs, grabbing the few things she could carry. Her mother's hairbrush, the photograph of her parents, the money she'd saved. She could hear the fire below her, hungry and hot. Caleb appeared in her doorway. We need to go, now. My things, leave them. We don't have time. He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the stairs. Smoke was filling the hallway, thick and choking. Evelyn stumbled, and Caleb caught her, half carrying her down the stairs and out the front door. They collapsed on the lawn, coughing. Behind them, the house burned. All the men were out. Everyone was safe. But they watched helplessly as flames consumed the building Caleb's father had built, the rooms where his wife had lived, the kitchen where Evelyn had spent months making the place feel like home. It burned until there was nothing left but foundation stones and ash. As the sun rose, they stood in front of the ruins, exhausted and hollow. Wheeler had won. He'd destroyed everything, the barn, the cattle, and now the house. There was nothing left to fight for. Except there was. Because as Evelyn stood there, covered in soot and ash, her lungs burning from smoke, she felt something unexpected. Not despair, rage. Pure, crystalline, focused rage. Wheeler thought he'd broken them. He thought he'd won. He was wrong. We rebuild, Evelyn said. The men turned to look at her. They were covered in ash, exhausted, standing in front of the smoldering ruins of what had been their home. Some of them looked at her like she'd lost her mind. With what? Danny asked, not unkindly. We've got no house, half a barn, depleted cattle, and maybe $300 between all of us. We rebuild anyway. Evelyn's voice was steady. Not here. Wheeler's proven he can reach us here. We rebuild on the North Range, where we can see anyone coming from miles away. We build smaller, simpler. We focus on survival first, everything else later. That's... Marcus paused. That might actually work. It won't be comfortable, Evelyn continued. It won't be what we had, but it'll be ours, and Wheeler won't be able to burn it without us seeing him coming. Caleb had been silent, staring at the ruins. Now he turned to face them. She's right. We can't stay here. This location is indefensible. But the North Range has high ground, clear sight lines, access to water. He looked at his men. I know you're tired. I know this feels impossible, but I'm asking you to try anyway. We're with you, boss, Old Tom said. Others nodded agreement. Then let's get to work. They salvaged what they could from the ruins. The stove was cracked but might be repairable. Some of the foundation stones could be reused. Everything else was gone. Furniture, clothes, supplies, the accumulated possessions of years. Evelyn owned exactly what she'd managed to grab during the fire: a hairbrush, a photograph, and $63 that suddenly felt like nothing and everything at the same time. They moved operations to the North Range that day. It was rough country, rockier, more exposed, but Caleb was right about the visibility. You could see for miles in every direction. Nobody could approach without being spotted. The first night, they slept under tarps stretched between trees. It was cold, uncomfortable, and nobody slept well. But they were together and they were alive, and Wheeler hadn't won yet. The next morning, construction began. They couldn't afford lumber, so they used what the land provided: stone from the creek bed, logs from the tree line, mud and grass for chinking. It was primitive, but it would hold. Evelyn worked alongside the men, hauling stones and mixing mud until her back screamed and her hands bled. Nobody questioned whether she should be doing this. They needed every pair of hands. By the end of the first week, they had walls. By the second week, a roof. It wasn't much, a single large room with a fireplace at one end and sleeping quarters at the other. But it was shelter. More importantly, it was defensible. They built it like a fort. Narrow windows positioned for sight lines, heavy door that could be barred from inside. Clear fields of fire in every direction. If Wheeler came again, they'd see him coming. But Wheeler didn't come. Days passed, then weeks. The attacks stopped. No cut fences, no scattered cattle, no mysterious fires, just silence. "He's waiting," Caleb said one evening. They were finishing dinner, simple food cooked over the fireplace, eaten from mismatched plates they'd borrowed from neighboring ranchers. "Waiting for us to fail on our own." "Will we?" Danny asked. "Depends on the winter." Caleb stared into the fire. "We've got enough cattle left to rebuild if we can get them through to spring. But if the winter's hard, if we lose more stock—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Evelyn cleaned up from dinner while the men played cards at the rough table someone had built. The new cabin was cramped, 17 men and her, all sharing the same space. Privacy was a memory. Comfort was a joke. But it was home. She'd started to understand something during those weeks of rebuilding. Home wasn't about the building or the furniture or the comfort. It was about the people, the shared purpose. The decision to stay when leaving would be easier. She'd made that decision. So had they all. In late November, a visitor arrived. Evelyn saw him coming from a mile away. A single rider on a good horse, moving at an easy pace. She called to Caleb, who came out with his rifle. But as the rider got closer, Caleb lowered the weapon. "That's William Hutchins," he said. "Bill's son. Haven't seen him in years." William Hutchins was maybe 30, with an honest face and tired eyes. He dismounted and shook Caleb's hand. "Heard what happened," he said without preamble. "Heard about Wheeler burning you out. Heard you fought back." "We're still fighting," Caleb replied. "That's why I'm here." William pulled an envelope from his coat. "My father died last year. Before he did, he wrote this. Said if anyone ever stood up to Wheeler publicly, I should give it to them." Caleb opened the envelope. Inside was a letter and something else. Papers. Legal documents. "What is this?" Caleb asked, reading. Everything my father knew about Wheeler's operation. Dates, times, witnesses, people Wheeler paid to lie, people he threatened, all the things he did to force my father off his land. William's voice was bitter. My father was too scared to use it when he was alive. But he documented everything, hoping someday someone would. Evelyn moved closer to read over Caleb's shoulder. The documents were extensive, page after page of detailed accounts. Names, dates, specific incidents. It was everything they needed. "Why didn't your father come forward himself?" she asked. "Because he had a wife and kids to protect. Because Wheeler threatened to ruin us completely if we spoke out. Because he was tired and scared and just wanted to survive." William met her eyes. "But you're not scared. And you're making Wheeler pay attention. My father would have wanted to help that." "This could change everything," Danny said, reading through the documents. "Or it could get us all killed," Marcus added quietly. "Either way, it's a choice we get to make." Caleb looked at William. "Thank you for this. Your father was a good man. He was a broken man. Wheeler did that to him." William climbed back on his horse. "Make it mean something. Make Wheeler answer for what he's done." After he left, they gathered around the table and went through every page. The documentation was meticulous. Bill Hutchins had been a careful observer, noting dates and details that could be verified. "This is enough to take to the territorial governor," Chen said. "Real evidence, not just accusations." "Wheeler will say it's fabricated," Caleb pointed out. "Then we verify it. Cross-reference the dates with other incidents. Find the witnesses Hutchins mentions and get their statements." Evelyn was already making notes. "We build a case so solid even Wheeler's lawyers can't tear it apart. That'll take time." "Then we take time. We've come this far. We can be patient." They worked through the night organizing documents, making lists of witnesses to contact, building timelines. By dawn, they had a plan. It would take months, maybe longer, but they had a path forward. The winter came hard that year. Snow started in early December and didn't stop. Drifts piled against the cabin walls. Temperatures dropped so low that water froze solid in minutes. The cattle huddled in the lee of hills, and the men took turns riding out to check on them, coming back half frozen. Evelyn kept the fire going constantly, melting snow for water, rationing their dwindling food supplies. She'd learned to stretch meals in ways that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago. A little meat, a lot of potatoes, creativity with seasoning. The men grew thin, so did she. But they survived. Christmas came and went unmarked except for a slightly larger dinner. New Year passed the same way. Time became measured in storms. The big one in January, the worst one in February, the one in March that they thought might kill them all. But spring came eventually. It always did. The snow melted, revealing dead cattle. They'd lost 40 more head over the winter, but enough survived. Barely enough, but enough. And through it all, they'd been building their case. Chen made trips to town, tracking down the witnesses from Hutchins' documents. Some were scared. Some had left the territory. But enough were willing to talk that the picture became clear. Wheeler had been running the same scheme for 8 years. Intimidation, sabotage, legal harassment. At least 12 families had been driven out. Some had been paid poorly. Others had just disappeared. It was systematic, calculated, criminal. By April, they had everything they needed. Caleb made the trip to the territorial capital himself, carrying the full documentation. He was gone for 2 weeks. When he returned, his face was unreadable. "Well?" Danny demanded. "They're investigating, officially. The governor assigned a special prosecutor to look into Wheeler's land acquisitions." "That's good, right?" Evelyn asked. "It's a start, but it's not a guarantee. Wheeler has friends in high places. This could still go sideways." Caleb looked around at the rough cabin, the depleted herd, the worn faces of his men. "But it's more than we had, and it means we survived long enough to fight back." The investigation took 3 months. During that time, Wheeler tried everything. More lawsuits, attempted bribes, threats against the witnesses, but the prosecutor was honest and the evidence was solid, and slowly, inevitably, the case built. In July, formal charges were filed. Arson, fraud, extortion, witness intimidation. The list went on for 3 pages. Wheeler was arrested on a Tuesday morning. The news reached the ranch by afternoon. Evelyn was working in the garden. They'd planted one behind the cabin, trying to become more self-sufficient, when Chen came riding in fast. "They got him," he shouted. "Wheeler's in jail." Everyone stopped working. For a moment, there was just silence. Then someone cheered. Then everyone was cheering, whooping, throwing hats in the air. Evelyn stood in her garden, dirt on her hands, and felt tears running down her face. They'd done it, actually done it. The trial took place in August. Evelyn attended every day, sitting in the gallery with Sarah and a growing number of people who'd been hurt by Wheeler over the years. The courtroom was packed, people standing in the back because there weren't enough seats. The prosecution laid out the evidence methodically, document after document, witness after witness. The pattern became undeniable. Wheeler's lawyers fought hard, but they couldn't explain away the physical evidence, couldn't discredit all the witnesses, couldn't make the timeline of suspicious incidents look like coincidence. On the final day, Evelyn was called to testify. She walked to the stand on shaking legs, very aware of Wheeler's eyes on her. But when she spoke, her voice was steady. She told them everything. The fire at the Johnson place, the cattle theft, the barn burning, the house. She described the pattern, the escalation, the terror of living under constant attack. "And why didn't you leave?" the prosecutor asked. "Because it was my home. Because running away meant he won. Because someone had to stand up and say this wasn't acceptable. She looked directly at Wheeler. Because I refuse to let bullies win just because they have money. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They came back with guilty verdicts on all counts. Wheeler was sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison and ordered to pay restitution to every family he'd damaged. His assets were to be liquidated to cover the payments. When the verdict was read, Wheeler's face went white, then red. He started shouting about appeals, about connections, about how this wasn't over. But it was over. Everyone in that courtroom knew it. Outside, people celebrated. Strangers shook Evelyn's hand, thanking her for her testimony. Sarah hugged her so hard her ribs creaked. Even the prosecutor stopped to tell her she'd been brave, but all Evelyn wanted was to go home. She found Caleb waiting by the horses. He looked tired but lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. "Ready?" he asked. More than ready. They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The mountains stood sharp against the horizon. The land stretched out forever, wild and beautiful and theirs. When they reached the cabin, the men were already celebrating. Someone had gotten whiskey from somewhere. Danny was dancing a jig that made everyone laugh. Even old Tom was smiling. Caleb pulled Evelyn aside before she could join them. "I owe you an apology," he said. "For what?" "For not seeing you clearly that first day. For thinking you were just someone who needed help. For underestimating you completely." He paused. "You saved this ranch. You saved me. I don't know if I've said that clearly enough." "You've said it multiple times. It's getting embarrassing." "Too bad. I'm saying it again." He took her hand. "Thank you, Evelyn Harper, for staying, for fighting, for being exactly who you are." "You're welcome, Caleb Turner, for all of it." They stood there, hand in hand, while behind them the celebration continued. And Evelyn realized something. She was happy. Not relieved, not just glad it was over. Actually happy. Standing in front of a rough cabin with a man whose hand was warm in hers, and a future that was uncertain but possible. "About that dinner," Caleb said. "The one I promised you. We're in the middle of nowhere. There's no restaurant for 50 miles. I know, but I can cook. Not well, but I can try. And we can eat at that table the men built, and maybe it won't be fancy, but it'll be ours." "When?" "Tonight, after the men settle down. Just you and me, and whatever I can manage to cook without burning." "That sounds perfect." Later, after the celebration wound down and the men drifted to their bunks, Caleb made good on his promise. He cooked, badly, burning the meat and oversalting the potatoes. But Evelyn ate every bite and declared it the best meal she'd had in months. They sat at the rough table, drinking coffee, talking about nothing and everything. About the ranch they'd rebuild properly now. About the cattle they'd replenish. About the future that was finally possible again. "I want to ask you something," Caleb said as the fire burned low. "Ask. Stay, not as the housekeeper, not as an employee. Stay as my partner, in the ranch, in rebuilding, in everything." Evelyn's heart jumped. "Is that a proposal?" "It's an offer of partnership, of shared responsibility and shared profit and shared decisions." He looked directly at her. "And yes, if you want it to be, it's also a proposal. To marry me. Build this place together. Face whatever comes next together." She thought about the woman who'd stepped off that train 6 months ago. Rejected, humiliated, desperate. She thought about how far she'd come, how much she'd changed, how much she'd found. "Yes," she said simply. "To which part?" "All of it? Partner, wife, whatever you want to call it. Yes." He smiled then, really smiled, and she saw the man underneath the hardened rancher. The man who'd lost his wife and his home but kept fighting anyway. The man who'd given her a chance when nobody else would. "I don't have a ring," he said. "I don't need one. I need a partner. Someone who sees me as an equal. Someone who won't walk away when things get hard." She reached across the table and took his hand. "That's what you're offering. That's what I'm accepting." They married the following week in town. It wasn't a big ceremony, just them, the ranch hands, Sarah, and a few other friends. Marshall Davies even showed up, looking sheepish but sincere in his congratulations. Evelyn wore a simple dress, nothing fancy. Caleb wore his best shirt, the one without patches. They spoke their vows standing in front of the rough cabin they'd built together, And when they kissed, the men cheered so loud they probably heard it in Denver. The celebration lasted until dawn. Then everyone went back to work because ranches didn't run themselves and there was still so much to do. Over the next year, they rebuilt. The restitution from Wheeler's assets gave them enough to buy proper lumber. They built a real house, still simple, still practical, but solid and weatherproof. They rebuilt the barn bigger than before. They bought cattle to replace what they'd lost. Other families who'd been driven out started returning, buying back their land from Wheeler's liquidation. The valley began to feel alive again, populated by people who'd been given second chances. Evelyn ran the household, but also the books. She managed finances, negotiated supply contracts, made decisions about breeding stock and grazing rotation. Caleb consulted her on everything, and she consulted him. They were partners in every sense of the word. The ranch prospered. Not spectacularly, there were still hard seasons and setbacks, but steadily. They built something sustainable, something that could weather storms both literal and metaphorical. 2 years after the wedding, Evelyn stood on the porch of their house, watching the sun rise over land that was partly hers now. Her name was on the deed, right next to Caleb's. Equal partners. Behind her, she heard Caleb moving around inside, making coffee in his usual noisy way. She smiled. She thought about Thomas Garrett sometimes, the man who'd rejected her on that platform. She wondered what he'd think if he could see her now, successful, partnered, genuinely happy. Probably he'd tell himself he'd dodged a bullet, that she was too old, too stubborn, too much work, and he'd be right. She was all of those things, but she was also strong, capable, and unwilling to quit when things got hard. Those were the qualities that had saved this ranch, that had built this life. Thomas Garrett had done her a favor by walking away. He'd forced her to find her own path instead of settling for his version of her future. The door opened behind her. Caleb handed her a cup of coffee and stood beside her, looking out at the same view. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About choices. About how the worst thing that ever happened to me turned out to be the best thing. Being rejected by Garrett? Being forced to choose my own life instead of accepting someone else's plan for me." She sipped her coffee. "I came west to be someone's wife, to fulfill a role. Instead, I became a partner, a businesswoman, someone who matters because of what I do, not who I married." "You would have done that anyway. It's who you are." "Maybe, but I might never have discovered it if things had gone differently." They stood in comfortable silence watching the ranch wake up. Men emerged from the bunkhouse, heading to their morning tasks. Cattle lowed in the distance. A hawk circled overhead, riding the morning thermals. "You know what I learned?" Evelyn said eventually. "What?" "That home isn't something you find. It's something you build. With your hands, with your choices, with the people you choose to keep in your life." She looked at him. "I didn't find home when I stepped off that train. I built it. We built it together." "That's a good lesson. Cost us everything to learn it. Worth it, though." "Yeah," Evelyn agreed, "it was." 3 years later, when a young woman stepped off the train in Ashford, alone, scared, clearly running from something, it was Evelyn who met her. She recognized the look in the girl's eyes, the desperation, the hope mixed with fear, the determination to make something work even when everything had fallen apart. "You need work?" Evelyn asked. The girl nodded, too proud to beg but desperate enough to try. "I've got a friend who runs a boarding house. She's always looking for help. Or if you can work a ranch, I know several who need hands. The work's hard, but the pay's fair and people here look out for each other." "Why are you helping me?" "Because someone helped me once when I needed it, and because I remember what it's like to step off that train with nothing but hope and stubbornness." Evelyn smiled. "Come on, let's get you sorted out." As she helped the girl get settled, Evelyn thought about the woman she'd been when she arrived, broken, humiliated, certain her life was over. She'd been wrong. Her life hadn't ended on that platform. It had begun. Not the life she'd planned, not the safe, conventional existence of being someone's wife in someone else's house. Instead, she'd built something better. Harder, yes, more complicated, full of struggle and setback and moments of pure terror. But hers, that made all the difference. She went home that evening to the house she'd helped build, to the man who saw her as an equal, to the life she'd chosen instead of the one she'd been given. And she was happy. Not perfectly happy. Life didn't work that way. There were still hard days and difficult decisions and problems that didn't have easy solutions. But she was building something that mattered, with someone who mattered, in a place that had become home, not because it was easy, but because she'd fought for it. That night, sitting on the porch with Caleb beside her and the stars overhead, Evelyn thought about the question that had haunted her on that platform 6 years ago. What now? She finally had her answer. Now, everything. Now. A life she'd chosen. A partnership built on respect. A home earned through hard work and harder choices. A future that was uncertain but possible. Now she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not because someone had chosen her, but because she'd chosen herself. And in the end, that made all the difference.